shows yet another similarity since this address is also on the back of several Morphe products. Truth Hurts, a member of the Viper Chicks who did the series with Jaclyn Hill, pointed that out in a response to my video clip. Moving right along, I also did 2 videos where I discussed batch codes. One of the videos was about the batch code information sent to me by Gigi Spill the Tea, also a Viper Chick member, where she also compared the similarities in the format for the one and only batch code for Jaclyn Cosmetics to the formats used for the aforementioned Morphe Jaclyn Hill Vault palettes, as pointed out by Zadi Doll. The second video I did was Tea exclusively sent to me, revealing the fact that the batch code for these lipsticks was the same one being used for the Morphe Fluidity concealers. Funny enough, the same day that I was sent this information, Jaclyn Cosmetics addressed the batch code issues along with other things and said that it was a production code, and this indirectly confirmed that Morphe and Jaclyn Cosmetics were produced in the same facility at the same time. Here is that clip comparing the concealers to Jaclyn's lipsticks that was sent to me. As you can see, there is too many coincidences and similarities to not think that these lipsticks came from Morphe. Between the Jaclyn Cosmetics campaign video theme fitting in more with the Vault Collection campaign using the same consultancy firm as Morphe, the similar format to the batch codes from the Vault palettes, the exact same batch code as the aforementioned Morphe concealer, and now this lab result paperwork, it's just too close to comfort, and them being named in the lab test results is the final nail in the coffin in my opinion. I also feel that because this scandal is ongoing, there will be even more similarities discovered, perhaps more incriminating than the lab test results. Anyway, that is it for this video. If you are not already subscribed, go ahead and do so. Click the bell and set it to all notifications so that you will be the first to know the hottest tea as soon as I spill it. As always, let me know what you think of all this down below. Thank you for watching, take care, and I will see you all soon.
All those moments will be lost in time.
Hey guys, what's up and welcome back to my channel. So, did I go outside for like 10 minutes and get a sunburn? Yes, I did. I know, I should have put sunscreen on, but I never leave the house, so I forgot the whole protocol of me being a white-ass bitch. Today's story is not exactly a story time as much as it's a story time with very political implications. And I used to talk about politics a lot more on my channel, but I
This week on BuzzFeed Unsolved, we look into the disappearance of Walter Collins, a 90-year-old case about a 9-year-old boy who vanished on his way to the movies.
Not the time you want to vanish. You want to vanish on your way back from the movies after having seen a lovely film.
You'll come to see that there are lots of twists and turns to this case. It's a hard one to pin down.
Well, let's pin it.
It's gonna get weird, so let's strap in. On March 10th, 1928, 9-year-old Walter Collins donned a lumber jacket, brown corduroy trousers, black Oxfords, a gray cap, and set off to see a movie in the Mount Washington neighborhood of Los Angeles. Walter never returned home. His mother, Christine Collins, a telephone operator, reported her son missing 5 days later on March 15th.
Well, immediately there are some red flags here. Because I'm gonna do the math. And the math involves me hearing you say the words 5 days later.
Yeah,
and
that is
saying,
true.
5?
Yeah, that is true.
That's a bit of a difference. It is 1928. I don't know if people
Just wander off?
maybe.
I mean, you strike me as a kid who wandered off. Maybe
I was a
didn't come back at
wanderer,
curfew.
bit of a wanderer, but I always reported back by, you know,
The certain time.
10 p.m. or so.
Yeah.
You know, it was a cul-de-sac. Where were we gonna go?
Also, they'd find you rather quick, too. Be on the lookout for a big head boy.
Big head boy, that's what they called me. My parents, yes.
Big head boy. At that time, the city was still reeling from the kidnapping and gruesome murder of a 12-year-old girl, Marion Parker, that had happened only 3 months earlier. Tips of alleged Walter sightings started coming in from as far away as San Francisco and Oakland. In one bizarre tip, someone claimed they saw the boy at a Glendale gas station, his body wrapped in newspaper with only his head visible. Police searched for months, but still no Walter. Finally, in August, Illinois police picked up a runaway boy who matched Walter's description. The child told authorities he was Walter Collins and gave authorities a, quote, hazy story about his abduction, end quote. He spoke to Christine over the phone, and Christine paid $70 to bring her son back to Los Angeles. For the next 3 weeks, the boy stayed with Christine until she realized this boy was not her son.
See? Well, okay, well, now I'm onto something. Because it took this lady 3 weeks to realize that this boy, who probably...
Oh, okay, all right, I'm gonna cut you off right there.
He's 9 years old, that's a full person.
Yeah, but here's...
And she's like, well, I'm pretty sure he's my boy. Well, he's got the same haircut, he wears the same clothes.
Yeah, but you gotta add in the grief factor. This mom thinks she lost her son, and she is now hoping for any sign of good news, and they say, this is your boy, he says he's your boy. You're gonna naturally want to believe it. But after a while, you gotta face the facts. That's not her son. You're right, he's 9 years old. He clearly has defining features at that point.
So is the idea here that maybe this was just some down on his luck boy who'd read the paper and thought, well, here's a meal ticket. I look kind of like this boy, maybe a little bit like him. I'll tell him I'm this boy.
Well, I guess we'll have to find out.
Okay, detective brain.
Christine found it suspicious that the boy was 1 inch shorter than Walter, and she used dental records to prove that this was a different kid. Christine told police, quote, yes, he looks like Walter, and in some ways he acts like my son, but still, I'm not certain about it. You see, Walter was quiet and well-behaved. He always called me mother. This child calls me ma, and at times he is hard to handle. I certainly hope he is my son, but somehow I can't bring myself to believe it, end quote.
I love this new Walter. I'm a big fan of him.
Oh, like he...
Waltzing into the place like he owns it.
Yeah.
Hey, Ma, why don't you make me some apple pies, huh?
Ma, PB&J. Now, I asked you 5 minutes ago. What's up? The police, fixated on closing the case because of public pressure, insisted it was Walter. They conducted a series of tests to prove the boy was Walter. They had the boy find his way back home from memory and brought in Walter's pet dog, who allegedly recognized the boy as its owner. Still, Christine was not convinced.
I mean, dogs are dumb.
I love how she was like, look at his dental records, it's not him. And they're like, hey, does this doggy recognize you?
Also, puppies just like little boys. Puppies are always like, ooh, it's a little man. Let me wag my dumb tail and lick him.
Allegedly, LAPD Captain J.J. Jones told Christine, quote, what are you trying to do? Make fools out of us all? Are you trying to shirk your duty as a mother and have the state provide for your son? You're the most cruel-hearted woman I've ever known. You are a fool, end quote.
Bit harsh from Triple J there.
From J.J. Jones.
From comic book character J.J. Jones.
J.J. Jones does sound like the name given to a bad cop, like a comically bad cop. Like
Yeah.
if he was a character in a movie, I would say this man's a caricature. No one's that evil.
Why is he calling this woman a fool?
He called her cruel-hearted, too.
Yeah.
He also, he made it all about him. This woman is missing her kid, and he was like, what are you trying to do, make me look like a fool and incompetent at my job? And she's like, no, I'm just trying to find my son.
Yeah, this is very rude of him.
The police then had Christine forcibly committed to the Los Angeles County General Hospital Psychiatric Ward on September 8th. While Christine sat in the psych ward, J.J. Jones again spoke to the boy police had picked up in Illinois. During that discussion, the 12-year-old confirmed to J.J. Jones that he was not Walter Collins, but instead, Arthur Hutchins.
Well, J.J. Jones, it looks like you've got egg on your face.
Yeah. Do you think when the kid said, yeah, that's not me, was he like, man, I really thought that was you? Or do you think he was like, he's like, shut the hell on, kid? What are you doing?
At that point, yeah, because now he's a fool.
No, he's
Fool is him now.
he has now realized the folly of his ways. I kind of love when someone gets a good dose of karma. You get their instant karma, their comeuppance. But yeah, this guy definitely deserved it. He put her in a psych ward because she wouldn't agree with him about who her son was. Christine had been correct the entire time. The kid the police had dumped on her was not her missing son, but instead Arthur Hutchins. After Arthur's mother died, the boy ran away from his father and stepmother. He was hitchhiking around the US when in a DeKalb, Illinois cafe, someone told him he resembled a missing boy from Los Angeles. When he was picked up, juvenile authorities were skeptical about his story, but police were so desperate to close the Collins case that they insisted on its veracity. As for why Arthur lied, the 12-year-old told authorities he wanted to go to Hollywood to meet cowboy actor Tom Mix.
I love this boy.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong. You can't indict this boy for being an opportunist. Like,
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. This is a beautiful story for him. I really love this kid's moxie because he's sitting in some rundown cafe in the middle of the cornfields. Someone walks in and says, "Hey, you look like this missing kid." And he goes, "Is that so?"
where's he from?
"From Hollywood, you say? Get the cops in here." Cops come in, he's like, "Yeah, I'm that boy." Send him out to LA. He's gonna meet his favorite cowboy person, but they're like, "Well, first you have to go hang out with this crying woman for a while."
That's probably why he was so grumpy.
Of course.
Because he was like, "God, I just want to meet Tom."
Yeah.
You got this like wailing
It's like, can we please go to the movies?
Christine was released from the psych ward on September 13th and sued the LAPD. Captain J.J. Jones was suspended from duty by the LAPD, though he was later reinstated and ordered to pay Christine $10,800 for the abuse she suffered under his custody. However, J.J. Jones never paid.
Unbelievable. I mean, believable, but
Like $10,800 is actually quite a bit for that time, too.
yeah, I wonder what the inflation cost would be there.
I mean, it's definitely not cheap.
No.
And not a big shocker that JJ didn't pony up the dough.
I'm proud of her for suing him.
Yeah, the dude's a freaking set of clown shoes. He deserves it.
It seems like, there's a lot of, this is America, people press charges, people sue a lot.
But apparently the LAPD took that very seriously by reinstating him and not making him pay the amount that he
Well, we
owed
don't
her.
need to get into the practices of the LAPD.
We do not. And as we all know, we do know that you believe they are corrupt from past episodes.
That's true. I do believe it.
Meanwhile, the real Walter Collins was still missing. So with that, let's get into some theories. Our first theory was put forth by Walter's father, Walter J.S. Collins, who was serving time in Folsom Prison on robbery charges at the time. The elder Walter worked at the prison cafeteria, and his responsibilities included reporting the violations of other inmates. Because of this, he could have made many enemies, which is why he believed his former fellow inmates may have kidnapped Walter for revenge.
All right, I guess that is a theory.
That is a theory. Not my leading theory, but it is a theory.
You wouldn't just like knock him on the head or something? A guy writes you up for like taking too many mashed potatoes and you're like, "I'll tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna disappear his boy once we're out of here."
I don't think they have like the foresight to plan that out. You get angry in prison, it's happening right there and then. You're not gonna be like, "I could."
That's what I'm saying.
I'm gonna wait.
You'll execute your revenge quite swiftly.
Exactly. You're gonna take like a fork and stab him right
It's the
there.
cafeteria. It's the only place where there's weapons on hand.
The second theory, one with substantial weight behind it, is that Walter was kidnapped by a pathological liar named Gordon Stewart Northcott and murdered on Northcott's chicken farm. Days after Christine was released from the psychiatric hospital and approximately 40 miles east of downtown Los Angeles, immigration officers were closing in on a 3-acre chicken farm in Wineville, California. They'd received a tip about an illegal worker who had been smuggled across the American border with Canada. The chicken farm belonged to Gordon Stewart Northcott. After he convinced his father to buy him the land in 1926, Gordon claimed he needed help running the farm. He drove to Canada to visit his sister Winifred in Saskatoon. He talked Winifred into letting him take her 14-year-old son, Sanford Clark, with him to the farm.
Chicken farms really scare me.
Why is that?
I think it may be sort of a Texas chainsaw vibe. Any sort of super rural area where there's one guy and a lot of animals.
There's some crazy stuff happening in that farm.
Probably smells.
Yeah. Just a fair warning, you're gonna want to buckle up for this one because this is not my favorite story. There, Gordon began to physically, emotionally, and sexually abuse Sanford. Sanford's story, unfortunately, was only the start of the horrors young men met at the hands of Gordon Northcott. Gordon had a pattern of kidnapping and murdering boys, then dissolving their bodies in quicklime. In August 1928, Sanford's 19-year-old sister, Jessie Clark, came to visit her brother on the farm. Sanford told her everything that had happened. Jessie alerted their mother, and they contacted the American consul, telling them that Gordon had smuggled Sanford from Canada. When investigators got to the chicken farm, Gordon, along with his obsessive mother, Sarah Louise Northcott, had fled.
So this is just a serial killer who may have been involved in all this.
May have been involved, and we're going to get into...
Definitely a serial killer.
He is a serial killer, I would say, and we're going to get into how he was maybe involved.
Okay.
Police found blood-soaked ground and bodily remains around the ranch, and Sanford was safely taken into police custody. Items belonging to missing young boys from Southern California were found about the property, including Boy Scout badges, library books, and letters written to their parents. Nelson and Louis Winslow, 10 and 12-year-old brothers missing from Pomona, as well as a Mexican boy named Alvin Gotea, were among those victims whose possessions or remains were found. On September 15th, Sanford told investigators his story. Police showed him 30 photos, hoping to identify other victims who met their fate on the farm. One that Sanford positively identified was Walter Collins. So,
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think you would forget that, right?
I don't know.
And there's
I
no
know.
reason for him to lie.
No reason for him to lie. It's just, I guess I don't know how many people he'd come into contact with there.
While he was there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, pretty damning, though, I would say.
Yeah, not great.
No. Gordon and his mother were arrested in Calgary, Canada on September 20th and extradited back to the United States to stand trial. Gordon initially confessed to the murder of 9 young boys, but was only charged for the deaths of 3. There wasn't enough evidence for him to be charged in the death of Walter Collins, but Gordon was nevertheless sentenced to death by hanging and was executed on October 2nd, 1930. Though Gordon wasn't convicted for Walter Collins' murder, his mother spent the rest of her life in prison after confessing to having killed Walter with an axe and burying him in a chicken coop. The notoriety from the gruesome murders was so bad, the town of Wineville decided to separate itself from that chapter of its history when in 1930 it renamed itself Muraloma.
You ever been?
No, I haven't been to Muraloma, but if I had,
No, you're a Southern
before
California guy. I didn't
before this story, I would now be a little unnerved.
know. Well, they changed the name.
But just the idea that something so bad happened in the town that it changed its name.
Bad things happen in every town, I'm telling you.
Yeah, that's true.
We live in Los Angeles.
I'm sure there's dozens and dozens of bad things happening every day in Los Angeles. It's a dark town sometimes.
It's one of those things that, no, we don't.
Yeah. As he awaited execution, Gordon sent Christine a telegram saying he would tell the truth about Walter if she came to talk to him in prison. Christine went to San Quentin on the eve of Gordon's execution, but Gordon backpedaled, saying, quote, "I don't want to see you. I don't know anything about it. I'm innocent," end quote. Gordon also left several notes in his cell, some saying he'd never met Walter, some accusing Gordon's father of kidnapping and murdering the boy. A pathological liar, it's impossible to know what Gordon said was true and what was fabricated. It's weird that this case is unsolved because it seems pretty cut and dry, but he wasn't convicted for the murder. He's saying that he didn't do it, but then his mom is saying that she did it.
He confessed to 9 other ones, though?
In some of the letters in his cell, he said that he didn't even know the boy.
Hmm.
It goes back to that deathbed confession thing where he knows he's about to be executed. Why not just come clean?
Yeah.
So in a weird...
Yeah, I mean, he's already taken the rap for...
Yeah, so might as well just come clean. But, you know, we're trying to, you know, dissect the mind of somebody who is clearly capable of very, very evil acts. So I don't really know if there's much merit to that. But this is, I guess, technically still unsolved because he wasn't convicted for the murder, and he's saying that he didn't do it, when I think it's safe to say that he did.
Well, we'll never know.
5 years after Gordon was put to death, one of the young men thought to have been murdered on the chicken farm turned up alive and well, opening up the possibility that Walter, too, had escaped a fatal encounter in Wineville on that chicken farm. For the rest of her life, Christine Collins never gave up hope that her son was alive. While Walter's most likely fate was at the demented hands of Gordon Northcott and his mother, what actually happened to the young boy remains unsolved. Yeah, that was a long, windy, uncomfortable road to get to the conclusion there, but trust me when I say that I tried to make that as palatable as I could, because I would not recommend looking up this man's history, because he is far more of a monster than we presented here.
Well, I will take you up on that recommendation and
Yeah, don't look
avoid
it
it entirely. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Ooh, we live in Los Angeles.
Awaited execution, Gordon sent Christine a telegram saying he would tell the truth about Walter if she came to talk to him in prison. Christine went to San Quentin on the eve of Gordon's execution, but Gordon
True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
By the time Sanford Clark was brought to this murder farm here, he'd already been in his uncle's company for several weeks. He'd been kidnapped up in Canada and driven down here. At first, Sanford wasn't even believed until they started digging around in the chicken coops and coming up with human remains. The thing that got me captured here was his father, Sanford Clark, and the way he recovered from it. I may not have met Sanford Clark, but I've seen the trail he left behind, and part of it's in his son, Jerry, of a guy who just wants to honor his dad.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick. A quick note before we get started. The team behind Missing Richard Simmons is back with an update and a whole new story. The series is called Headlong, Surviving Y2K. We all remember Y2K, right? The Armageddon that never happened? From an evangelical family preparing for the apocalypse to the coders who fixed the millennium bug, follow their stories through New Year's Eve 1999 and find out what happened at midnight. Plus, host Dan Taberski shares his own Y2K story. It's called Surviving Y2K because Dan barely did. Find Headlong Surviving Y2K in your favorite podcast app and subscribe so you won't miss an episode.
In 1928, agriculture and the movie industry were booming in Los Angeles. But a string of child abductions and murders in nearby Wineville changed the lives and views of the locals. Someone had kidnapped, sexually abused, and murdered at least 3, and possibly as many as 20, young boys. From 1926 to 1928, teenager Sanford Clark was kept prisoner on his uncle Gordon Stewart Northcott's chicken farm in Wineville. He suffered unimaginable abuse and witnessed horrific acts by Northcott. Sanford's escape from the clutches of his abuser and his journey to live a life without violence is truly inspiring. His time on the farm was a living hell, and the stories he shared with the police were unlike anything they had heard before. Today we're talking about a dark part of history that most people were in a hurry to forget. As brutal and upsetting as the crimes of Stewart Northcott were, it is the resilience and the strength of Sanford Clark that makes this story something worth telling, and something that can stay with us as proof that good can prevail over evil.
Today's beer is called Map of the Sun. I've often thought, wouldn't it be a good job to dream up beer names?
Absolutely.
This one I really like. Map of the Sun is brewed by the Rare Barrel in Berkeley, California. And it's a wild ale. See, I'm staying away from IPAs and stouts for the time being. So this beer is a straw-colored beer, big, huge, fluffy white head, and streaks of lace. Very pretty. Nice aroma, a lot of peach and apricot, fresh peach and apricot. maybe a hint of lemon, and it's got that tart acidic kind of aroma. Then when you taste it, the first thing you pick up is kind of a biscuity taste, some lemon. Peach and apricot are both there, but a little more subdued than you figured from the aroma. And it's still a nice tart one. It's a crisp, bubbly beer, one that I know you'll like. That's why I got it.
Thank you. Let's open it up and give it a try.
Okay.
All right, let's go on down to the quiet end.
Yeah, we'll just sit and relax.
Why don't you get us started?
So Sanford Clark was only 13 years old when he realized that his mother, Winnie, was going to send him away. Now, everything about the plan that was pitched to him sounded wrong, and he knew his mother and her brother, Stuart Northcutt, were lying to him and his father. But Sanford's mother was the boss, so whatever she said would be what would happen. The initial story was that Uncle Stuart would be taking Sanford on a road trip in his Buick to visit the city of Regina, which was about 150 miles southeast of where they lived, and it's the capital of Saskatchewan. Now, Sanford figured out pretty quickly this was a lie, and when he confronted them about this lie, Mom changed the story. She said Sanford's going to be traveling with his uncle to California. He's going to have an adventure there, and he's going to learn the value of a hard day's work. Sanford would be working on a farm with Stuart, and he would learn to be a chicken rancher.
So this was all bullshit, right? Because Sanford thought that the second story they gave him was even less believable than the first.
Well, yeah. I mean, neither of these stories. Here's this kid, he's what, barely a teenager, who's lived a pretty sheltered life, and here's what we're going to do with you? I mean, come on.
Yeah, and plus, Uncle Stuart was this delicate 20-year-old who was an aspiring pianist. He wasn't a farmer. He'd lived all his life in Canada until 2 years before that, when he and his parents had left for the United States. And the whole family knew that his dream was to become a pianist. And as for living out in the desert, why would anyone move from a city like Los Angeles to live in the middle of nowhere, unless they had to? His Uncle Stuart seemed both impatient and disappointed, because he'd made it clear for the entire 2 weeks of his visit there that he really wanted Sanford's younger brother, Kenneth, to go with him. He had worked hard to be persuasive, trying to get Winnie to let go of Kenneth. So Sanford was kind of like the consolation prize.
It sounds like. You think that Uncle Stuart had targeted his brother, Kenneth, first? That's the one he wanted?
That's the one he wanted. He was younger.
Yeah. Don't you think that Winnie and Stuart's mother knew what kind of a person Stuart was?
Yes, I think Stuart's parents and his sister knew who he was, and that's why she wouldn't give him Kenneth, because she liked Kenneth.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was kind of a surprise, though, to the whole family that Winnie refused to give Stuart Kenneth, because she'd always been willing to give Stuart anything he wanted. So much so that Sanford expected that he and his brother would both have to go with Uncle Stuart. But Kenneth was Winnie's favorite son, and she made no effort to hide her feelings about that. So she actually told her brother that he was asking too much of her when he asked for Kenneth. All talk of Stuart taking her favorite boy was over. Stuart would just have to make do with Sanford. So Sanford tried to protest and save himself, but Winnie's voice was very commanding and overbearing. Uncle Stuart tried to console him by talking about enrolling him in a local scouting program down in California, to offer him some boyhood adventure and to help him with character development. And Winnie added that that might be just what he needed, because she was always telling him there was something wrong with him. He just wasn't right.
Yeah, he wasn't her favorite kid.
No, she was very verbally abusive to him.
Well, I think you could say even more than that. I mean, she was a crappy mother.
Yes, she was a horrible mother.
Just a horrendous mother.
Well, of course, and this sending him away with Stuart really clinches that idea.
Yeah, because she knows what's going to happen to this kid.
I think she did, yeah, and she just didn't care.
No. Now, Stuart said that he didn't think Sanford appreciated how the ranching experience would mold his character. He would have to toughen that boy up, he added. Now, he laughed out loud at that and then winked at Sanford's mother. But this time, though, Sanford's mother didn't laugh along, which hit Sanford as very odd. Her expression changed when Stuart spoke of toughening him up. She looked away from Sanford. So this was so out of character for her that it gave Sanford a real sense of dread.
Because I think she knew what was going to happen, and she just wanted to be in denial of it.
Right.
Uncle Stuart announced that their first stop in California was going to be to visit his parents in Los Angeles. Sanford remembered his grandparents, but he barely knew them, He felt better for a minute when his older sister Jessie gave him a hug. The hardest thing for him was to leave her behind. She had been his protector very often through the years, but there was nothing she could do in this situation. She wasn't old enough to be expected to take him with her and support them both, and Jessie was far too protective of him to ever agree that he could quit school and work just so they could escape the family home together. She was kind of like his surrogate mom, and I think she was only 17.
She was. She wasn't much older than him.
Right. So when Sanford and Stuart reached the U.S. border, Sanford just kind of stood back and watched all of this energy that his uncle invested into lying to the guards there. And part of the story to get Sanford over the border was something about Sanford being born in the U.S., but they'd lost his papers, and someone in their family was dying in a United States hospital. Uncle Stuart kept up this nonstop chatter at the guards while he wove one excuse into another, until it seemed that in the end the officials just waved them across the border to get them out of the way. As soon as they cleared the border, they got into a pattern of driving through the day and then camping near the road at night. Uncle Stuart would take the car seat, so Sanford slept out in blankets on the ground.
Now, on this trip, Uncle Stuart talked a lot, and Sanford, if he didn't give the right answer that Stuart wanted, or if he didn't answer quickly enough, Stuart would smack him in the head. Now, he hit him so hard, Sanford would later admit, that he nearly fell unconscious and he saw stars or flashing lights in his vision. So this is a good start, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it even went beyond that. I think he was nearly unconscious from some of these hits.
Yeah.
These were full-force hits to the head.
Now, by the time they did arrive at the home of Sanford's grandparents, 62-year-old George Northcott and his 54-year-old wife Louise, Sanford was hoping that new people would improve Stuart's mood, which had been growing steadily darker over the past few days of the trip.
Yeah, but as soon as they walked into that grandparents' house, it was clear to Sanford that things weren't going to improve. Grandma Louise ignored Sanford completely while she fell all over herself to welcome her son, and she burst into tears and buried Stuart in her arms, repeating, my precious boy," over and over again, and just totally ignoring Sanford. And this caught Sanford completely off guard. He'd really forgotten what his grandparents were like and how melodramatic she could be and how loud she was. So she waited on Stuart hand and foot, and she had his favorite tea brewing in the kitchen and passed him a bowl of his favorite candy. And the whole image here just seems sickening.
As is portrayed, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So Sanford never knew anyone over age 5 who got so much attention. Grandma ignored her husband altogether until she pulled Grandpa George out of the best chair in the room and told her son to sit there. Uncle Stuart looked at his father and gave a shrug, then laughed out loud and sat down in the big chair. He leaned back and put up his feet. So we know who runs that household.
Yeah, it really didn't take long for Sanford to realize that his grandparents' relationship really worked about the same way as his parents' relationship did. Grandma Louise was in charge just like Winnie was. And Grandpa George was passively unhappy, just like Sanford's dad. He also seemed to be angry that Stuart had showed up with Sanford in tow. He acted the same way Sanford's father did when he was unhappy. He would just kind of remain detached and glowering, as if he was like under a dark cloud, but there was nothing he could do about it. He seemed quite powerless.
So Sanford kept as quiet as he could and tried to stay out of the way. But this attempt to conceal himself failed even before the first half hour had passed. Grandma Louise walked in front of Sanford so closely that she stumbled over his feet. It seemed to Sanford that she had done this on purpose. Grandma Louise blamed Sanford for tripping her, started calling him names, and he ended up being thrown out of the house. He was told that the only reason he was along on this trip was so that he could help Stuart set up the farm. His grandma Louise also threatened Sanford, saying that if she saw just one callus on her son Stuart's gifted hands, there would be hell to pay. Remember, he's supposed to be a concert pianist.
Yes.
Sanford would be expected to do all the labor involved in setting up and running the farm.
So having grown up in an explosive household, Sanford's learned response to irrational violence was just to placate his perpetrator. His survival instinct told him that if he allowed his Uncle Stuart to hurt him just a little bit, and then willingly humiliated himself before him, his uncle was less likely to hurt him anymore after that. So Sanford retreated into the dime store detective novels that he had put into his suitcase, before they left Canada, and he just remained careful to avoid any sudden movements, to make any eye contact. I mean, he's just walking on eggshells. Stewart told Sanford that he would make sure that he wouldn't run off. Sanford was just a useless boy whose family had put him out, Stewart said. He was an illegal immigrant in the U.S. also. And Stewart added sexual abuse to the physical abuse while they were in Los Angeles. He began by knocking Sanford senseless to the floor and then putting his mouth all over him while he masturbated. And things got worse, and we're not going to get into a lot of details, but it was just horrific stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad we're not getting into details.
No.
It's horrible.
But he committed acts that Sanford hadn't even heard of before. And then he left Sanford feeling really ashamed and sick. He didn't know what to make of it.
No, he's this little naive 13-year-old.
Right.
And geez. So when Sanford and Stewart left Los Angeles and arrived in Wineville, Sanford wondered how anybody could use the word ranch to describe the 3 acres they had set aside for raising chickens. The property had a well with a pump inside of a useless wire fence. Grandpa George had arranged for construction crews to begin work on the small farmhouse, and Sanford was expected to help with anything they needed around the place. In the meantime, he and Stewart would live in a tent and build chicken coops, stocking them with birds and getting the business started. This is going to be a chicken farm for eggs.
Okay.
Okay, it's not a farm for eating chickens.
Okay.
We're keeping them egg layers.
I bet they still eat some chickens.
Well, yeah, they did, but
Yeah.
it wasn't primarily a farm to raise chickens for consumption.
Okay.
They were looking at the eggs.
Okay. So in spite of everything that had happened thus far, Sanford felt reassured once the work started. He had reason to believe that things might improve now that they were finally there, because whatever Uncle Stewart's problems were, he was still a blood relative of his, and Sanford thought that should count for something. Also, Stewart needed Sanford's help at the farm, and that gave Sanford some value. And this gave Sanford hope that his uncle would stop abusing him.
Unfortunately, Sanford couldn't have been more wrong about this. The first rape on the farm took place before the end of that first week there. They had already pitched their large tent and set up the home campsite, and they were moving a fresh shipment of chickens into the new wire pen. Uncle Stewart started out the attack by acting gentle, but as soon as Sanford tried to move away, he was bludgeoned to the ground and dragged into the tent. At his grandma and grandpa's place, the shock and humiliation had been overwhelming, but there hadn't been any significant pain. But here in the middle of nowhere, alone on the farm, Uncle Stewart decided to sodomize Sanford, which obviously is going to be quite painful. He's screaming in pain, but no one heard him. Sanford eventually learned to keep quiet, and that would keep Stewart from beating him even more severely than he already had.
Well, when Stewart left the farm, Sanford did consider running for help. But it was his shame and disgust from the sexual abuse that kept him from talking to anyone. He really felt like no one would help him if they found out that he had participated in this with his uncle, even though, of course, he had no choice. He was a victim. But the way he saw it, if he did mention any unnatural behavior, he would have to say that he had gone along with it, and then he thought no one was going to want to hear this. So at the same time, he feared that if he put his story into words, it would make it more real for him. To speak of such things would give the story additional power over him, and it would drive the listener away. He thought people would be disgusted by him, and he would be isolated. So this is what kept Sanford from getting help or thinking that he even deserved help. Now, this isn't uncommon for sexual assault victims to feel guilt and at least partial responsibility.
That's right. I mean, it's going to end up sort of becoming what we now know as the Stockholm Syndrome, where you identify with your captor.
Yes, but I think Stewart kind of knew how to pull him in, especially when he starts abusing other kids.
Yeah.
To make him feel like he's part of it.
He knew exactly what to do.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we take a quick break here for our sponsors?
Okay.
So if you're a fan of True Crime Brewery, you probably enjoy true crime stories, especially the ones that shine light on the darkest corners of humankind. Lurking in the shadows behind petty criminals and amateur thieves are the masterminds of the criminal world. In Kingpins, a new podcast from Parcast that I really enjoyed, they take a deep dive into the minds and the stories of the men and women who rule the crime world. Each episode looks into organized crime rings, street gangs, or mafiosos to expose how the kingpin or queenpin rose to the top, and also how they eventually fall. Kingpins also reveals what kind of person is drawn into this life by using extensive research to profile them. Episodes on Frank Lucas and Richard the Iceman Kukinski are available now. New episodes come out every Friday, and one upcoming episode I'm really looking forward to is on Pablo Escobar.
That's a fascinating story.
So search for Kingpins where you listen to TCB. That's KINGPINS. Or you can visit parcast.com/kingpins to start listening today. PARCAST.com/kingpins.
So this episode is also sponsored by Madison Reed. Going to the salon can be quite a luxury, but it can also be very expensive and time-consuming. I love Madison Reed because it's a company founded by a woman who's really on a mission to revolutionize the way women color their hair. When I discovered Madison Reed, I had been getting my hair colored at the salon for years, and I honestly never thought I would color my hair at home again. Those drugstore box colors were very hit or miss, mostly miss, so it wasn't easy for me to take that leap and try Madison Reed, but I'm very happy that I did. Madison Reed really has reinvented hair color with the quality of salon color and the convenience and affordability of coloring your hair at home. Join me in getting multidimensional European hair color delivered to your home on your schedule for under $25. You can find your perfect shade at madison-reed.com. Madison Reed is honoring our True Crime Brewery listeners. With 10% off and free shipping on your first color kit with our promo code BREWERY. That's madison-reed.com and use the promo code BREWERY to get 10% off plus free shipping.
And finally, I have an exciting announcement to make on behalf of Payne Lindsay and Oxygen. In a one-night special TV event, Oxygen brings to life Payne Lindsay's hit true crime podcast, Up and Vanished. In 2016, Payne took a deep dive into the disappearance of Tara Grinstead, a young teacher who went missing 13 years ago. Payne has dedicated himself to Tara's case every day, slowly unlocking the secrets her small town couldn't shake. Tara was last seen on October 21st, 2005 in Ocilla, Georgia. She was heading home from a barbecue and suddenly went missing. Tara's story remained a mystery for over a decade, but then Payne stepped in. His search for the truth got the town to start talking, and the Up and Vanished podcast became a national phenomenon, reaching over 240 million listeners.
But the story doesn't end there because Payne is still at work, determined to find answers. So don't miss Up and Vanished, a one-night special TV event based on the hit podcast on Sunday, November 18th at 7 on Oxygen, the new network for crime.
So back to the story. One night after they had arrived on the farm, Uncle Stewart's car returned, and Sanford heard two voices, Uncle Stewart and somebody else. It was a boy's voice, speaking broken English with a Mexican accent. So Sanford heard Uncle Stewart walk the boy over to a chicken coop. Coop was framed in 2x4s and covered in wooden sheets. The solid wood solid wood walls hid everything inside. Sanford heard the wooden door close, and he knew that Uncle Stewart was blocking the only exit. And this was the moment when the truth was clear to Sanford. The only reason for Uncle Stewart to have started up the farm was so that he had an excuse to be isolated up there. And this realization terrified him. And then he heard screams from the coop.
Yeah, and I really think that his parents knew that when they bought him the farm,
Yeah,
at least on some level,
no, there's absolutely no question.
because he'd been in trouble back in Los Angeles.
He hadn't. He'd been in trouble in Canada
Yeah,
before they moved to LA.
exactly.
That might have precipitated the move to Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
But they knew, his parents knew, or at least his mother for sure, knew what kind of a person he was.
But she loved him. So it's really gross.
Well, okay. Loved him. I'm not even using that term.
Okay. Well, the little Mexican boy was screaming until his lungs were empty, and then he gasped in as much air as he could and went right back to screaming again. His third scream was choked off, and there was silence for a few moments. Sanford recognized the sounds that came next. They were from Uncle Stewart. He was in his frenzy that Sanford was familiar with. Sanford knew that the boy was being shoved face first into the dirt and raped by his Uncle Stewart, but he felt helpless to do anything. The terrible noises actually caused the hens in the other coops to start squawking, and the attack seemed like it went on forever. If he cried out to Uncle Stewart in an attempt to stop this attack, he knew that it would bring Uncle Stewart back to him. So Sanford cried, but he didn't let Stewart hear him. Uncle Stewart hated crying. Sanford had learned that just a day before, when Uncle Stewart told him, "If you're crying, that just means you're trying to trick somebody into letting you off easy. You're trying to duck out on your responsibility out of pity." And his uncle just seemed to be full of these ridiculous words of wisdom.
He always had them. So the assaults on this kid went on inside the hen house for days, maybe a week or more, but Sanford had lost track. One day was pretty much like the next. Guilt overtook him because of his relief at being left alone. Uncle Stewart kept to himself and ordered Sanford to keep all the farm routines going, adding that he was keeping the boy bound and gagged during the daylight hours while the construction workers finished up the house. So Sanford worked on his chores alone, enough to keep him busy through the daylight hours into the night. And the labor actually was a welcome distraction. At night, Sanford would keep his sanity by tuning the noises out, but his helplessness and outrage were incredibly painful.
Yeah, I really can't imagine what this boy was going through. He was completely isolated out there and abused.
And he's a little kid.
Yeah, he's a little guy. And his family's abandoned him, right? His mom sent him out for this. I just can't imagine the emotional pain that would cause, not to mention all the physical pain. So I guess Sanford thought that he accidentally made it worse by being too obvious about avoiding contact with the boy, to the point that Uncle Stewart set him up to have contact with the boy. He handed Sanford an open can of beans and told him to take it out to the boy in the coop. Sanford had no idea how else to react but to go along. He had already learned that whenever Uncle Stewart was in the mood to act civilized, it gave him a moment of safety, kind of a reprieve from the abuse. So when Sanford entered the hen house that day, he saw a young Mexican boy, and his face looked like he might have been a year or two older than Sanford, but he was just as small and thin. The boy was cowered on the ground as if he was expecting another attack. In that instant, everything that Sanford had managed to push out of his thoughts until then sprang up before him. He was in terrible condition, the little boy, with his face disfigured by the swelling. And Sanford realized that the boy was holding on to one of his arms as if it was broken. His legs were changed to a heavy post, and that was something that his uncle had added.
Yeah, no escaping.
No, but I think when the little boy saw the bruises on Sanford, he tried to get Sanford to help him escape, and Sanford did think about that.
Yeah, he actually planned to help the boy escape that night. He had found a hacksaw and was waiting for his Uncle Stewart to fall asleep, and he was going to try to get the chains sawed through so the kid could escape.
Right. Well, he would have had to go with him, obviously, because his uncle would have beat the hell out of him.
Or he would have killed him, probably.
Probably.
Unfortunately, Sanford fell asleep himself. Then when he woke up in the morning, Stewart's car was gone and so was the boy. Now he hoped that Stewart had taken the boy somewhere and dropped him off, and the boy would be safe. He wouldn't tell anyone what happened to him because the shame would be too great. but maybe the boy would be able to live a normal life. That was Sanford's hope.
Which just wasn't realistic. I mean, sadly, that wasn't going to happen.
It wasn't.
So, boy after boy who came there, I think that his uncle killed them all. There's
They-
nothing to lead us to believe that any of them were set free.
Not at all.
Well, Sanford's big sister Jessie was worried about him after he left. She thought there was something very creepy about Uncle Stewart, and as time went on with no letters from her little brother, she wondered if he was angry with her and that's why he wasn't writing. But she believed that his life at home was so bad that practically any other situation seemed better for him. I mean, she really had no idea how evil Stewart was. So Jessie kept quiet about it. But Sanford's time away from home dragged on for her, and she began to feel like she would give anything to be able to just talk to him. Now, well-off people back then would have a telephone in their homes, and some ordinary people in the city had them, but she didn't personally know anyone who had a telephone. And the problem was that even if they had a public telephone right next door, Stewart wouldn't have a telephone at his home for her to call Sanford on. So it's kind of complicated.
Well, remember, this is just about 100 years ago, 90 years ago.
Yeah,
Things sure were different then.
very different, yeah.
So,
I mean, when you were across the country, you were pretty much out of touch, except for letters, which took days and days to get to you.
exactly. So and that's what Stewart had Sanford do. He had him write a letter to his family back home, but Stewart dictated to Sanford what he was going to say. He was telling her he was being well taken care of and everything was fine. Now, Sanford's father found the wording to be odd, and he ended up meeting secretly with Jessie without telling his wife Winnie.
Which was, I guess, a bold move for him, because
Very.
he very rarely defied his wife. So it almost, to Jessie, that was a really brave thing her father did.
It sure was.
Well, I mean, to most of us, I wouldn't say that's very brave.
No.
He should have said to her, we're not sending my son away. But I guess for him and the way things were in that family, this was a brave thing. It was unusual. So Jessie took the letter from her father and she wrote to Sanford. When she didn't receive an answer, she decided to go and see Sanford herself to make sure that he was okay. So she had to save money. It took her a while to work up to this. And as she was working toward going to check on him, Sanford continued to suffer terrible abuse and trauma on the farm. He was knocked out by Stewart, and he woke up a few times in a dirt hole that was covered by wooden slats that were held down with heavy bricks. He was actually raped 2 to 3 times a week. He was burned with boiling water thrown on his back. Stewart continued to bring home young immigrants and torture them on the farm, and then they would disappear when he was done with them.
And then there was a time that Stewart returned to the farm with a bucket, and he made Sanford look inside, and Sanford was horrified to see that it was a human head. Stewart ordered Sanford to burn it down to a skull and then bash it to pieces.
Yes, and it had dark hair. He thinks it was one of the young immigrants. And actually, if you read the book, The Road Out of Hell, there was a lot about what Uncle Stewart would say to Sanford about getting away with murder. He talked about it quite a bit with him.
He did. He's making him complicit in it.
Telling him that you needed to behead them so they couldn't be identified. Telling him places where he would hide a body. It's just horrific for this kid. And that's why it's just so impressive to me that he got out of this and lived a normal life. It's unimaginable.
previous case on Creepy News. On the 9th of April, 1483, Edward IV of England died unexpectedly after an illness lasting around 3 weeks. The wine
True crime.
Things got worse, and we're not going to get into a lot of
In English with a Mexican accent. So Sanford heard Uncle Stuart walk the boy over.
And Sanford realized that the boy was holding on to one of his arms as if it was broken. His legs were changed to a heavy post, like his uncle, but he didn't, not at all.
No, he did. He had a pretty productive life.
Yeah.
I mean, he suffered his whole life.
Terrible abuse and trauma on the farm.
Sanford do. He had him write a letter to his family back home, but
Life. It's unimaginable.
a pretty normal life.
Yeah, I mean, he could have easily turned out being a monster like his uncle, but he didn't, not at all.
No, he did. He had a pretty productive life.
Yeah.
I mean, he suffered his whole life from flashbacks and PTSD,
Of course, yes.
but did pretty well, relatively speaking.
Well, he had a family who said he was a great guy to them, to
He
his
did.
kids.
He was married for over 50 years. Now, Sanford's grandmother and grandfather would just look the other way if they happened to be visiting the farm while Uncle Stuart had one of his boys there. Stuart liked to pick them up and keep them around for a few days at a time. Grandma and Grandpa never questioned why the boys did no work or why there was a different one there the next time they came. Uncle Stuart's first attack on Sanford had been back in Los Angeles, and it was at night when both grandparents were home and supposedly sleeping. But they could have heard, although they never admitted it.
Oh, I'm pretty convinced that they did.
Well, yeah.
How could you not hear that? This wasn't a huge house.
So, and just in the same vein, they might know exactly what it meant to see Uncle Stuart's visiting workers hanging around the place. Grandpa Northcutt had stayed there overnight before the ranch house was finished, when the kid who was there at the time screamed half the night out in the hen house. At one point, Grandpa yelled out that he's trying to get some sleep, but except for that, it was never mentioned again.
Well, there you go. There's your proof right there.
Yeah, see? So morning came and the boy was gone, and nobody talked about it.
It's kind of like a dirty little secret that they're complicit in. And of course, the mother will become even more complicit.
Yes.
So to survive without going insane, Sanford held on to this idea that he was different from the rest of the Northcotts. And he reasoned that if he was that kind of monster, he wouldn't want to get out of there so badly as he did.
Yeah, kind of that reverse logic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Jesse's opinion of things was very important. In case he ever saw her again, he tried to assure himself as to why he was different from the rest of them. What he actually did was each and every little thing that Uncle Stuart told him to do. It was only after taking beatings in the beginning, but after a while, he'd stopped resisting. It was too difficult to get his work done, with the aches and the stabbing pains that would follow a bad beating. And he was severely injured, and he would continue to work.
Now, time passed, the abuse continued, and Sanford saw himself as a partner in the horror that went on the farm. This realization was so powerful and devastating that Sanford abandoned the idea of trying to write a real letter to Jesse, one that would use his own words and not dictated by Uncle Stuart. There was no way for him to be able to tell Jessie enough that would get her to do something to help him without revealing things that he was sure would drive her away forever.
And then we're back to the guilt there.
We are.
So Sanford did all of the work on the farm, and I mean all of it. And so he felt that that was his only value to Stuart, but that was how he knew that Stuart would probably keep him alive. He would make his life a living hell, but he probably wouldn't kill him because he needed him to do the work. Sanford was physically violated so often that he had nothing right with him in his rear end area. It was constantly bleeding, no matter what, and his back continually ached from the burn that Stewart had inflicted by throwing the boiling water on him. The only treatment he'd gotten for this large burn was that his uncle would put petroleum jelly on it. Now that didn't help at all.
No,
Not a good burn treatment.
it certainly isn't.
So in fact, the burns seemed to get worse. It took forever to heal. Every once in a while, Uncle Stewart would force him to write another letter home, and he would go along to save himself another beating. So there were some letters going home, but they were all dictated by Uncle Stewart.
Yeah, and it's all, I love this place, I'm doing well in school, I've joined the Scouts troop, I'm having a great time.
Yeah, but the sister was pretty sure those weren't his words, and so was Sanford's father, although he wouldn't say much about it. Also, his writing was very rudimentary. It's not like he was continuing in school and learning anything over those years.
No, his sister Jessie was pretty convinced that he wasn't attending school
Yeah.
because his handwriting looked like shit, and the diction was that of a kid that hadn't been schooled.
Exactly.
So in every few weeks, Stewart would disappear for a while and then return with a new Mexican boy. Each new boy lasted for about a week or so, and then Stewart would begin to see him as a liability. And by then, they had seen too much of him. So Stewart's habit, while the new boy was there, had been to allow Sanford to stay out of sight. Sanford hustled to keep the place running, and he was glad for the chance to gain some little piece of consolation in the feeling that he was making himself indispensable while his uncle remained inside the house with the new victim. It was such a relief to be left alone, but the guilt was overwhelming because Sanford knew another boy was suffering in his place.
It's such an impossible situation.
Isn't it?
He cringed at the feeling of powerlessness and at his sense of cowardice because he felt like he should have been braver. He should have done something. But the truth was that by the time the first year there had passed, Sanford had begun to take personal comfort in these terrible sounds, which made his guilt even worse, because it meant that Stewart was busy for a time. It meant that he could sleep, and most of the time, Stewart wouldn't show up to yank him out of his bed if he had another victim there. So Sanford could wake up to the roosters and not to some monster raping him in his bed. For a while he had hopes of somebody dropping by one day and overhearing what was going on, but nothing like that ever happened. Sanford did not know whether or not the devil really existed, but he really felt like his uncle was some kind of demon.
Well, he was. So by the beginning of 1928, Uncle Stewart was constantly taking day-long trips, even a few overnight trips. And that March, Stewart showed up at the farm with a 9-year-old boy named Walter Collins, who was a little Caucasian who had been reported missing by his mother in Los Angeles. Now, this was the first boy that had been brought to the farm who was not a Mexican immigrant. Stewart knew Walter and his mother, Christine. He'd met them both at a grocery store in Los Angeles.
So this was kind of shocking to Sanford when he saw this, and he heard that the boy knew who Stewart was.
Yeah, that's potentially trouble for Stewart, isn't it?
Yeah, but he was so naive, Sanford was, that he thought that meant Stewart would have to let him go. He wouldn't be able to kill this boy. But Stewart was getting more and more reckless, which criminals tend to do. The thrill, they need to do more and more to get the thrill. So Stewart had lured Walter to ride with him to the ranch by telling him that he had horses and that Walter could go riding there. But after Walter arrived, he began to feel very worried. He had a worried look on his face. Sanford believed at first that Stewart would have to let him go, because he did know his mother. But it became clear soon after that Stewart planned to rape and torture this boy, and eventually murder him as he had the other boys. The only point of restraint that Sanford had ever seen his Uncle Stewart use was the consideration of whether or not he could get away with something. But now, with Walter Collins, that last remaining restraint seemed to have been crossed. There was nothing too twisted or terrible that Stewart would not do. He just seemed to be following whatever horrible urge he had.
Yeah, so Sanford stayed out of the house for 2 days and nights, sleeping in the feed room to avoid seeing or hearing anything. He knew Walter must have been chained up inside after he saw Stuart strolling around outside, bare-chested and smoking a cigar. A big part of Sanford's survival technique was to stay too busy to think about things, and as for Walter Collins, he had no desire to see him at all. It was bad enough having to face all those boys who couldn't appeal to him in English, but it was terrible to think of him talking to a victim whose words he could actually understand.
But he did end up having to do that. His uncle had him take him and wash him up, said he was dirty, which it was mostly blood all over the boy. And he did get Sanford involved.
He did, and he gets him involved even worse.
Yeah.
Because while Walter was still being held on the farm, who visits but Grandma Louise? So Stuart hid Walter in one of the chicken coops and had Sanford stack bags of feed along the walls to keep her from hearing Walter scream. Walter was chained to a post and gagged. But on the third day of her visit, Grandma Louise found Walter. Now Walter begged her to save him, apologizing for making Stuart angry with him.
Now what she does is almost eerier than what Stuart does, because it's quite shocking to think of a grandma behaving the way she did. Now, she'd apparently been covering for Stuart for years, and she referred to his child molestations as his special interests. But she really showed more concern for the possibility that Stuart might get caught than for anything else. She didn't show any empathy or concern for Walter. Louise decided that the quietest way to kill Walter was to use an axe. So she'd gone out and talked to Walter and actually kind of comforted him while he fell asleep out there, then gone in and made the plan to go out and kill him. A little boy.
Yep.
It's really sick. So she, Sanford, and Stuart, according to her, would each have to strike a blow on Walter, so none of them could ever talk about it. So they would all be culpable.
They're all guilty, so we can't squeal on the others.
Right. Now, when Sanford gasped hearing this, because, okay, he knows that she's kind of a piece of shit grandmother, but he certainly didn't know that she was a murderer. How shocking is that? So what kind of boy are you, she said to him, that you don't understand the bond between a mother and her son? So she was going to kill this boy for Stuart, to save Stuart.
That's right. So Grandma Louise said she would strike Walter first. It would be an act of mercy for the poor child, she said. Then Sanford would hit him, whether he was dead or not, followed by Uncle Stuart. Sanford cried and refused, but then Uncle Stuart threw a smaller axe at him, which cut his arm. So Sanford hit Walter with the dull side of the axe after Louise and Stuart had struck and killed him. Then the two adults supervised as Sanford dug a hole for Walter's body. So as soon as the remains of Walter Collins were dropped into the hole, Sanford was left there alone to fill up the grave and pack down the dirt. This was while Uncle Stuart drove Grandma Louise back to town. "We can trust you now, Sanford," Uncle Stuart told him as they were leaving. "Now you're really part of the family."
Yeah, it's really horrific. And a similar thing happened that May when Stuart brought home two brothers, Nelson and Lewis Winslow, who were 10 and 12. They had gone missing while walking home from a model yacht club meeting, and Stuart brought the boys out to the farm. They became his latest victims. By Sanford's best estimate, Stuart had killed nearly 20 boys since they first moved onto the ranch. How many boys had died before that was unknown, but Sanford did wonder why his grandparents had moved out of Canada. In totaling up the figure on the ranch victims, he forced himself to go back to the beginning, back to those first few months when he had believed that Stuart supposedly was taking these boys someplace where he would drop them off. So he did make Sanford participate in the killing of Nelson and Lewis Winslow as well.
He did.
And it's just so sad what these boys went through when they got there and found out what their fate was. Terrific.
Oh, it's just horrible. Now, in August of 1928, Sanford's sister Jessie finally visited. Sanford was 15 by this time. Jessie was certainly concerned about his welfare. The letters she had received from him didn't seem to be his own words, and his writing had not improved at all, so she thought that he wasn't going to school.
Yeah, I think she was pretty sure that something was wrong.
Oh, she knew.
She didn't know how wrong at all, though. I think she was quite shocked to find out how bad it really was.
exactly.
I mean, no one would even imagine that it was that bad.
Well, it's beyond belief, actually.
It is. It really is.
So Sanford was so terrified with Jessie at the farm because he was certain that if she found out what was going on, Stuart was going to kill her.
Yeah, I just can't imagine how scary that would be. But he knows that his sister's there and that this guy's a murderer. So he knows that her life's in danger and she doesn't. It's a terrible position that this kid was in.
Horrible.
So it took some time, but Jesse finally convinced Sanford to confide in her, and he told her that he was really fearing for his life there. And one night while Stuart was asleep, Sanford told her that Stuart had killed at least 4 boys at his ranch. Jesse returned to Canada about 1 week after this discovery, and Sanford promised that he would come up right behind her. Once in Canada, Jesse informed the American consul there about Stuart Northcott's crimes. And they wrote a letter to the Los Angeles Police Department detailing Jesse Clark's sworn complaint. So on August 31st, 1928, 2 United States Immigration Service inspectors visited the chicken ranch in Wineville. And they found 15-year-old Sanford at the ranch, and they took him into custody.
Now Stuart had seen the agents driving up the long road to the ranch, and before fleeing into the trees, he told Sanford to stall the agents or he's going to shoot him with a gun, with his rifle. During the next 2 hours while Sanford did stall them, Stuart kept on running. Finally, when Sanford did feel that the agents could protect him, he told them that Stuart had taken off into the trees off the edge of his chicken ranch property. Stuart actually had fled to Los Angeles, and he and his mother went from there to Canada. But they were arrested near Vernon, British Columbia, on September 19th, 1928. Stuart confessed to killing more than 5 boys, while his mother pleaded guilty to killing Walter Collins. Stuart allegedly, at this point, had killed over 20 boys, but the state of California did not have enough evidence to indict him of those killings. They were only able to charge him with the 2 cases of the Winslow brothers and the headless Mexican.
So Sanford did testify at the sentencing of Louise Northcott that his uncle, Gordon Stuart Northcott, had kidnapped, molested, beaten, and killed 3 young boys with help from his mother and from Sanford himself. Sanford also testified about the murder of a 4th boy, a Mexican, where Stuart had forced Sanford to help dispose of that head in the bucket by burning it in the fire pit and breaking the skull to pieces. Stuart stated that he left the headless body by the side of the road near Puente, California, because he had no other place to put it. Sanford also said that quicklime was used to dispose of the remains and that the bodies of Lewis and Nelson Winslow and of Walter Collins were actually buried on the Wineville Chicken Ranch. At the ranch house, authorities also found a Pomona Public Library book that was checked out to one of the Winslow brothers. some clothing that would be identified as theirs, and a note that one of them had written to their parents saying, "Don't worry, we are fine." So how sad is that?
Incredible.
It's just heartbreaking.
Then in December 1928, 3 months after his arrest, Stewart was taken to the chicken ranch in handcuffs. Police reported that he initially said 9 boys had been killed there, but he admitted to killing only 5. In a written confession that day, he owned up to just 1, believed to be a Mexican ranch hand. "I killed Alvin Gothea on the ranch on February 2nd, 1928. No self-defense. Gordon Stewart Northcutt will plead guilty to the above charge in Riverside County tomorrow."
Because he actually decided to be his own lawyer, right?
Right.
Yeah. So he was sentenced to death in February of 1929, and he was hanged in October 1930. It's remarkable to me that he was only 23, so he started so young. Just makes me feel like he was evil from the get-go. When he took Sanford, he was only 20 or 21 years old.
Correct. And this behavior had been going on for some time.
Definitely.
So,
Yeah. Well, actually, due to all this negative publicity that Wineville received, the city changed its name in 1930 to Mira Loma.
yeah, Wineville Avenue, Wineville Road, and Wineville Park are the only remaining references of the community.
So you can find out more about this series of murders in an episode of Criminal Minds, and in the book we talked about called The Road Out of Hell, written by Anthony Flecko, along with Sanford's son Jerry Clark. There's the movie The Changeling with Angelina Jolie, and that's about Walter Collins going missing and this other boy that the police tell Christine Collins is her son, even though she knows it's not.
Yeah, and we don't find the reference or the connection to the chicken farm until the very end of the movie.
Right. So they really don't talk much about that in the movie. I was
Right.
surprised.
The only, I guess, uplifting thing here is the way Sanford managed to pull himself up and live a good life.
Yeah.
Because he had so much guilt and such low self-esteem, and he had a lot of difficulty trusting people.
Well, Jesus, yeah.
No kidding.
How could he not have difficulty trusting people after that? I mean, it's not only what his uncle did to him, his parents let him down in such a big way.
All the adults.
Yeah, the grandparents.
knew.
Yeah. Everyone except his sister, who didn't have that much power.
One thing we didn't talk too much about, but in the book there's a prosecutor named Loyal Kelly.
We didn't talk about that at all.
But he was a person who had a tremendous influence over Sanford and probably was instrumental in helping him survive. And not only survive, but be a good member of the community.
Yeah. Well, he actually was put into some kind of boarding school for troubled kids, but it was very progressive.
Yeah.
And he was rehabilitated.
He actually got therapy
He did.
instead of just keeping them locked up.
Mm-hmm. And I guess he had Kelly to thank a lot for that. And he really looked up to him.
He did, and he worked hard not to disappoint him.
Right. It's probably the first man to treat him with kindness and have any faith in him. I think at first he was just surprised that anyone would be nice to him. That's how sad it is.
Yeah, isn't it?
Yeah. So a sad case, like I said, but really inspiring how Sanford Clark was able to rehabilitate and get away from there and actually function. I mean, any functioning at all as an adult after that is commendable to me.
Wow. I mean, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, how could he possibly be any kind of a member of society?
Oh, yeah, I think I'd collapse into alcoholism and drugs if I had that life.
But he managed to pull through.
He did.
And they do comment in the book that there's several times, many times, of his PTSD causing him to be debilitated. But his wife and his sister, who lived not too far from him, always knew how to help him through it.
Yeah, I guess it's similar to someone who's been in a war.
Oh, yeah.
Very similar.
So, good, horrible episode.
Okay. All right. Well, I really do recommend the book if you want to find out more about this, because that's really the only reference that kind of gave us a feel for where Sanford was coming from. It was all from Sanford's point of view. So we have to give credit here to Anthony Flecko and Jerry Clark for that. The music for this podcast was written and produced by Tristan Capel. And if you enjoy True Crime Brewery and would like to offer support and gain access to members-only episodes each month, please go to our website, tiegrabber.com, and join Team Tiegrabber. You can also go to Patreon and become a patron. Tiegrabber members also receive gifts from us, as well as our endless admiration and devotion. We also appreciate getting voicemails or emails with case suggestions. And until the end of the year, people who get their voicemails played on an episode get a free t-shirt. So how's that?
I already noticed an uptick on
Yeah.
voicemails.
It's funny what a little bribery can do.
I tell you.
Yep. So before we get into your feedback, let me remind you that Payne Lindsay's hit true crime podcast.
And so both people ended up being whistleblowers, but I know firsthand how much a whistleblower is.
Beck.
Game in true crime. I really enjoy the ID channel, but it seems like most of the best true crime TV specials have been on Oxygen, including that recent one on the disappearance of Phoenix Colden. That was really riveting.
I enjoyed that a lot.
Yeah, so I have high hopes for this Up and Vanished. Okay, let's get on to feedback.
Let's do some feedback. So we got voicemails first.
Okay.
And first up is Levi.
Levi, let's listen to what Levi had to say.
She has a comment on Paolo Macchiarini.
Okay, so that's our most recent episode called Bad Medicine.
That's it.
All right, let's listen.
It's too hard, but your promise of a True Crime Brewery t-shirt, size large, thank you very much, motivated me to do it today. Also, Bad Medicine.
Hey Rain, sorry for the lack of a more formal address. Just stumbled upon a peculiar set of re-uploaded videos by the name of Don't Trust Man Alone Help Girl Fix Motor in Forest. Be careful. The original video was uploaded a mere 21 hours ago as of now and has gained over 14 million views. Instead of explaining all that I found in this email, I made a Reddit post that gives an overview of the video, along with the account that made it, their other videos, and a possible explanation. The link is here. It's not the creepiest set of videos around, but the pure bizarreness and amount of views that it has gained baffles me. Perhaps you might be able to make more sense of it.
So, I really had no idea what I was going to find going into this, and honestly, I still have no idea what I found. Before I get into that, however, let me provide more context via the Reddit link mentioned in the email. So the user begins by explaining that this all started when they stumbled upon a weird video in their recommended feed. The video, oddly titled, Don't Trust Man Alone Help Girl Fix Motor in Forest, yeah I know, was uploaded by a channel called Za, who at the time had roughly 190,000 subs, and claimed to be located in France despite the content appearing to be from Asia. Now, here's the really weird part, or at least the first thing in a string of weird shit to come. The video in question, according to the Reddit post, made over 13 million views in just under 24 hours. This was made even stranger by the video's supposed content, which according to the user was as follows. It was footage of a young Asian woman whose motorbike supposedly breaks down in the middle of a forest. While attempting to fix it, a man in a red shirt comes along and begins helping her. Soon the bike is working again and he drives her off, only to stop in less than 10 seconds and proceed to get off the bike, grab her around the waist, let her go, and then lead her off into the bushes. She doesn't seem overly concerned by this, however, smiling when pressed against a tree by the man, and then by the end of the video begins to lean into him and seemingly cuddle him as well. The user then adds that at the end, upbeat music can be heard until the pair get off the bike once more, and then the track changes to something quite, quote, suspenseful and foreboding. The user also points out up to 15 different accounts that had re-uploaded the video, all with the same intro. A call to action asking viewers to subscribe to Za. Now, on top of this wasn't Zaw's only upload. According to the user, tons of similar videos featuring a similar formula and the same actors were present. The clips all tagged as short films, which the OP decides must be the case even if the end results weren't exactly on point. At the end of the post, a few updates were made. One linking a video about botting and manipulating the YouTube algorithm, and another saying that on April 6th, the channel and all its contents had been deleted. So by the time I got to the story, nothing had changed. Everything was still gone, but what I find interesting is that the videos weren't removed by YouTube like I thought they'd be. The video in question bore a message saying it was removed voluntarily by the user who uploaded it. Of course, this didn't necessarily mean a dead end for me, though. Given the numerous re-uploads mentioned in the post, I figured there had to be more elsewhere, and if there were, searching "Don't Trust Man" would be enough to find them. Sure enough, this was indeed the case, but for some reason I only expected to find re-uploads of the original video that brought attention to all this. I was not expecting at all to find similar content uploaded across several different accounts, but that's what happened. All of these videos feature the same formula. Don't trust man, something something in forest, river, road, etc. The views on these videos varied wildly, with some hitting only 200 and others that had millions of hits. One account I found had over 100,000 subs and a grand total of 30 million views. The uploads were a mix of these Don't Trust Man videos and clips of a woman putting fruit on her face, supposedly as some kind of beauty treatment, I guess. Another video under the Don't Trust Man search results was this one, which as you can see has over 3 million views. I guess I can't show you exactly what's going on here, but just know that these two have their clothes completely on, and nothing is actually happening in the most literal sense. The pair
Blumhouse Productions is a company known for producing low-budget films with huge profit margins. An extreme example of this strategy is Paranormal Activity, which had a budget of just $15,000 but grossed almost $200 million worldwide. Blumhouse has continued with their strategy ever since and is now a household name in the horror genre with titles such as Insidious, Happy Death Day, Get Out, and most recently Halloween, and their impressive lineup of commercially successful movies. In 2013, Blumhouse released their biggest hit yet, The Purge. It was a huge box office success and even found its way into pop culture.
I know what this is! You've been able to sustain world peace because you have one night a year where you all run around robbing and murdering each other without consequence.
That's right.
What? It's like The Purge, Morty. That movie, The Purge?
Since then, 4 Purge movies and a TV show have been made, totaling over $500 million in profits for Blumhouse. I think the popularity of these films stem entirely from James DeMonico's genius premise. One night a year, all crime, especially murder, becomes legal, and citizens are encouraged to release the beast.
If you don't deliver him by the aforementioned time, we'll release the beast on him. And on you.
Release the beast.
I'm gonna release the beast! Release the beast, boys! Let the killing commence!
The government has urged the public to engage in criminal behavior as a form of catharsis, living the remaining 364 days of the year relatively crime-free. This premise allows for scenarios that are as brutal as they are entertaining, and practically begs the question to its audience, what would you do if the purge was real? Luckily for you, I am here to answer that question for you. I have studied the ancient manuscripts, and I have practiced state-of-the-art murdering technology. I even scoured the most vile and disgusting places on the internet for information. After 6 decades of research, I created a list of 5 ways to beat the purge. 4 of these cover how to survive the purge, and the last will reveal how to eliminate the purge once and for all. The purge runs for 12 hours, from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. on the night of March 21st. During these 12 hours, all crime, including murder, is legal. During the purge, Class 4 weapons and below are authorized for use.
Somebody once told me that what the fuck are those?
So what exactly qualifies as a Class 4 weapon or below? In the real world, this gets very, very complicated, because firearm classification as defined by federal legislation depends heavily on what specific law or regulation you're talking about. The short answer, however, is that the 4 or more weapon classes that the purge refers to do not exist. Federal legislation very generally places weapons into 8 categories, but the categories have nothing to do with how destructive a weapon is. Weapons are not grouped by how much damage they cause, but instead by what similarities they share. Machine guns, for example, is one category. All weapons in this category can fire multiple projectiles with a single action of the trigger. Another category is shotguns. A third is weapons made out of shotguns, such as sawed-off shotguns. My favorite category by far, however, is any other weapon, which is meant to classify disguised weapons such as umbrella guns, guns concealed as pens, or my personal favorite, knife guns. I mean, why would you disguise a weapon as another weapon? Look out, he's got a knife! No, wait, he's got a gun? Either way, arrest that guy. The point is, these categories are not a sliding scale of destructive capability, and are clearly not what the Purge was basing its class system on. If it were, the Purge would only allow rifles, pistols, and shotgun variants, but would not allow things like antique firearms, relic weapons, and much to my disappointment, knife guns. Since these weapon classes are not based on real life, the next step was to look at what was said by the director or the writers about what the weapon classes are. And fortunately, that is the same person for all 4 movies, James DeMonaco. Well, almost. He didn't direct the first Purge, which is not the same as the first Purge movie. The first Purge is actually the last Purge movie, but the first movie is called The Purge. Unfortunately, DeMonaco never mentions the weapon classes in interviews he gave for the Purge movies. But if I missed something and there's some hidden interview somewhere, like on a DVD featurette or something, please tell me about it in the comments. And throw out your DVD player, because real movie fans know that the best movie quality can only be attained on vinyl, okay? All of this leads me to believe that the statement about the weapon classes has no strict definition at all, and was just put in the script to sound cool. But at the very least, we can use the films themselves as guidelines for what is and what is not defined as a Class 4 weapon or lower. What we know for certain that is allowed during the Purge is handheld weapons, such as machetes, knives, needle, fists, exploding teddy bears? Really? Oh, and guns. Lots and lots of guns. The third rule of the Purge is that government officials of ranking 10 are granted immunity from the Purge and shall not be harmed. Again, just like the weapon classes, there is no such ranking system in the real world. The closest analog to rank 10 government officials in real life are the senior executive service positions. These are the highest held government office positions that are hired rather than elected. The senior executive service is the most likely line to draw, as everyone above it would be extremely difficult to replace, and losing them would be devastating to the functioning of the federal government. So those are the official rules of the Purge, but there is one more condition to consider. The Purge was sold to the public as a way to reduce crime, by giving the public one night a year where they can purge all the criminal feelings they have, such as elaborate murder, theft, elaborate murder, kidnapping, elaborate murder, or elaborate murder. However, the real purpose of the Purge is to eliminate the poor in order to decrease government spending, because the poorest Americans are the largest burden on taxpayers each year. In the real world, over $1 trillion, or 20% of the federal government's 2018 budget, was spent on Medicaid and social welfare programs. If the people who depended on these programs were eliminated, the government would stand to gain $1 trillion every year. Since the poor can't afford to defend themselves the way wealthy people can, they end up being the only victims of the Purge. Unfortunately, not nearly enough poor people were dying in order for this to work, so the government began to covertly murder its own citizens. They target the poorest areas of major cities and methodically slaughter civilians one apartment building at a time. So the unofficial rule of the Purge is that there are roaming battalions of the military killing off as many people as they can. So with the rules of the Purge out of the way, here are some general tips for beating the Purge before we get into the elaborate solutions.
1.
Don't purge. First of all, going out to commit a crime, especially to maim and murder, only invites unnecessary risk and the potential for you to get murdered in turn. In the original movie, a gang of private school kids break into the family's home with the intent to kill them, and are partly successful, but they get murdered right back by the family and their neighbors. In the second film, a group of wealthy Purge enthusiasts trap the protagonist in an arena with nothing to defend themselves so that the players can hunt them down for sport without any risk of danger to themselves. This backfires. In the third film, a group of kids who wants to steal a guy's candy bar because reasons.
I got a wicked sweet tooth tonight. And I want my candy bar.
On second thought, these movies are actually not very good. Holy shit! Is that Bubba from Forrest Gump? It is Bubba from Forrest Gump! Okay, I'm warming up to this movie a little bit.
My Negro.
huge mistake.
Right, so in the third film, a group of kids try to murder a shop owner and in turn get murdered themselves. It never works out for those who purge. The only exception being Lakeith Stanfield, because where others before him were killed, he was able to get out.
Hello, and it's time to play everyone's favorite game show, What is this old man thinking about? Is it A, he's thinking about his late wife? B, he's going to try and figure out what he's doing on purge night? Or C, he's thinking about, I don't know, waffles and pussy? Find out after these messages. And the answer is...
I'm thinking about waffles and pussy.
If you absolutely must purge, wear a mask. Wearing a mask not only keeps you on fleek on purge night, but hiding your identity is paramount for the day after the purge. If your coworkers, neighbors, or loved ones find out that you went on a killing spree during the purge, legal or not, they will probably not want to associate with you anymore. There's no danger of going to prison, but there is a real danger of social exile. So wear a mask.
Number 3.
The original Purge movie showed us that if someone wants to kill you, even if you have a powerful security system, there's virtually no way to stop someone from breaking into your home if they're determined enough. At best, security systems serve as deterrents in order to convince your would-be murderers that it really would be a lot easier to go kill someone else. The problem is, statistically speaking at least, the person most likely to murder you is someone you already know. 55% of all murders are committed by spouses, partners, affiliates, or ex-lovers. The people most likely to kill you know where you live and are really only interested in killing you specifically. They are not likely to be deterred by a security system, so don't stay home because that's the first place they'll look.
Gib du jetzt deine Stimme ab. Wenn ja, dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
Avoid major cities. Areas that have a lot of people not only increase your chances of running into murder tourists, which are a thing for some reason, but you could also come across a government death squad. So why would you go there during the purge? And now for our feature presentation. Here are the 5 solutions for beating the purge. Okay, so what if your goal is to just survive the purge? The best way for surviving depends on your level of income, and in these films we have some protagonists that are very wealthy and others that are extremely poor. With this in mind, I've devised 4 different solutions for 4 different levels of income, starting with someone who is as rich as the family from the first film, and ending with someone who is as poor as the homeless guy they saved. Lastly, I may have a solution for how to safely purge and get away with it, and in the process stop the purge from happening altogether. So, if you're wealthy, the solution for beating the purge is stupid easy. Leave the country. There is no rule stipulating that the borders are closed during the purge, nor is there any stipulation that citizens need to be stateside during. In fact, some tourists actually enter the country hoping to experience the purge for themselves. So why not just leave? If you're wealthy, you can go on holiday when the purge occurs. You can go to Fiji, Egypt, Hawaii. Actually, don't go to Hawaii, they're purging there. You could, however, go to Iceland. While others are wondering whether their ex-wife who they cheated on is about to bust down their front door with a Halmatro door blaster, which exists for some reason, and slice their goddamn head off with one of the 273 surrendered weapons from the hit show Forged in Fire, which is on the History Channel, even though it has nothing to do with history. And speaking of, why do they have a show about truckers driving on the ice? Because not only does it have nothing to do with history, it's also the least interesting show I've ever seen. And it is 11 goddamn seasons. Like, how can a show about ice road truckers on the goddamn History Channel have 11 seasons when Firefly only got 1 season? 1! And we get 11 seasons of ice road truckers on the fucking History Channel? Are you fucking kidding me? You could instead be going on a tour of Game of Thrones in Reykjavik. I was able to book a trip from Omaha, Idaho, a middle point in the country, to Reykjavik, Iceland, for a 2-week period during the purge for only $1,700 a person, which includes the flight and the hotel. Flights to Iceland are remarkably cheap. Food, however, is quite expensive, so I added another $300 per week in food costs, making for an estimated total of $2,300 per year. This is by far and away the best solution if you can afford it. The only problem with this strategy is that a lot of people are going to have the same idea. Purge season will become busier than Christmas Eve, which means that as the night of the purge gets closer, there's a real danger of being trapped in the country due to traffic and delayed flights. So to avoid that, the earlier you leave the country, the better. Make it at least a 2-week vacation and leave at least a week before the purge. That way you minimize your risk of getting trapped in the country. Another option might be to drive across the border to Canada or Mexico, but again there is a serious risk of getting stuck in a wall of traffic as those who can't afford to fly attempt a mass exodus out of the country. I would not consider driving to be a reliable solution unless you drove across the border weeks ahead of time. But for those who can't afford to fly or take time off work, what's the best option? A cheaper option, at least in the long term, would be to buy a boat. And here's why. The mainland United States has over 125,000 lakes, which means that on average there is 1 lake per 25 square miles. On top of that, the US also has 12,000 miles of ocean coastline. That is a lot of usable water. If you were to spend your purge on a boat, you would be significantly more difficult to reach than someone who's, say, not on a boat. Only 1 in 10 people in the US even own a boat, which means that only 10% of the population can actually reach you. If you live near the ocean, and most people do, you can drive your boat several kilometers offshore, turn off your lights, and wait out the 12 hours. Since most of the purge is at night, you'll be in the dark with no sources of light to illuminate you. The chances of anyone coming across you are almost zero. If you're too far inland to reach the ocean, you can use a lake. You would want to use a lake as large as possible in order to get as far away from the shore as you can, thus reducing the risk of sniper attack. Luckily, over 100 lakes in the US have over 50 square miles of surface area. If someone who owns a boat happens to come across you and wants to kill you, consider picking up the Ruger Precision Long-Range Rifle, which is designed to be deadly even at a range of 1,000 yards and uses a Creedmoor 6.5mm cartridge that some have described as so accurate it's boring when used at long range. To be used as a last resort, of course. The good news is that boats make a lot of noise, and that noise travels far on the water. So if someone starts to get close, you'll hear them coming long before you see them, allowing you to line up your shot well in advance of their approach. So the procedure on purge night would be to drive to the lake or the ocean a few hours before the purge, set off, turn off your lights, and then hunker down for the 12 hours. In the very unlikely event that someone in another boat finds you and approaches you, take aim with your Ruger and shoot with accuracy before they're in range to respond. And when you leave your house on purge night, make sure you don't tell anyone where you're going or what you're doing, and every year go to a different spot or place. This minimizes the chances of someone you know, such as an ex-wife or disgruntled coworker, from tracking you down. The biggest downside to this plan is the upfront cost. Just like cars, boats can range from a few $100s to a few million, but you should be able to find a decent 17-foot boat and trailer, which will handle most wave conditions in the $3,000 to $5,000 range. The Ruger will set you back another $1,700. While this is a lot of upfront cost, it shouldn't be outside the realm of affordability for someone in the middle class, which is what this solution was geared towards. In any case, it becomes more cost-effective than the previous solution in just 3 years. The other downside is that if there is a large storm occurring during the purge, you are going to have a very rough time on the water. In that case, I would just avoid the ocean entirely and stick to a smaller lake. Drop anchor and wait it out. If vacationing outside the country isn't affordable to you, or you can't get time off work, a boat might just be the best thing to keep you alive during the purge. If you can't afford a boat and are scraping the poverty line, then what you need instead is a budget solution to staying alive during the purge that won't break the bank. My advice? The forest. The cheaper option to flying out of the country or buying a boat is to park your car and walk straight into the forest for the night. The forest blocks line of sight, keeping you entirely hidden, and it also muffles any sounds. Drive to your nearest forest, walk into the woods, and then sit there and wait until the 12 hours are up. The chances of anyone finding you are almost zero. Some things you may want to bring with you are warm clothes and a tarp, as the purge happens in March, and maybe a GPS device to help you get back to your car in the event you get lost. The Magellan Explorers 310 is a bargain at $160, but you absolutely do not want to bring a tent and a sleeping bag, because in the unlikely scenario that someone does find you, you want to be able to see them coming, and you definitely don't want to be asleep. Since this is a budget solution, pick up the Cobra Arms Freedom 380 handgun, which is the cheapest gun on the market at $127. It probably isn't very durable or as accurate as its more expensive rivals, but it's lightweight, which makes it easy to carry, and it has very little recoil, and hopefully you'll never have to use it anyways. And since you're trekking into the wilderness, bringing a gun in case you run into a bear or a cougar might not be a bad idea. Not that a handgun is going to stop a bear, but hey, at least you'll piss it off a little bit before it flays you alive DiCaprio style.
Reboot will return after these messages. We now return to Reboot.
There are unfortunately some significant downsides to this solution. While there may be 1.1 million square miles of forests in the United States, most of those miles are distributed along the coastlines, which means that the middle states, such as Nebraska or the Dakotas, have almost no forests at all. If you live in these states and get off work at 3 or 4 p.m., there probably isn't enough time to get to a forest before the purge begins. In this scenario, you may be able to substitute forests for areas of tall grass, rocky outcrops, or anywhere else you can't be readily seen, while also avoiding populated areas. The other problem is that if someone sees your car on the side of the road, it essentially tells them that there is someone within walking distance. A truly skilled person may be able to track you down simply by using your car as a starting point. Ever watch Man Tracker? Imagine Terry Grant tracking you down during the purge and saying, "Pretty much buggered, ain't you?" right before he shoots your face off and feeds you to his horse. Though to be honest, if that chiseled jawline is the last thing I saw before I died, I would leave this earthly plane with no regrets. The chances of someone tracking you down in the wilderness is highly unlikely, but if your life is on the line, it's something worth considering. If this happens, you will have your gun as a last resort. This is not the best solution on this list, but it is one of the cheapest. And if you're forced to live through the purge on a budget, sitting in the forest may be your best option. But if you have absolutely no money whatsoever, you're homeless, and you live in a highly populated area, well, good news, because I have just the solution for you. It's called a dumpster. If you have absolutely no other option, hiding in plain sight is a very reasonable consideration. In fact, the main characters of the second film almost hide in a dumpster themselves, but that particular dumpster had a dead guy in it, so they just got turned off of the whole idea together. If they had simply gotten into the next dumpster and hid there for the rest of the night, they would have been completely fine. The point is, unless someone specifically sees you going into a dumpster or hears you inside as they walk by, there's no reason for anyone to open it. Instead of getting inside a dumpster, this guy ends up going on a crazy adventure throughout the city and ends up getting killed. He in fact would have been a lot better off in the dumpster. Obviously, there are risks here. If someone opens the dumpster and wants to kill you, you will be at their mercy. But the chances of that happening are very slim, and it's a lot better than being on the street. If I had no money at all, I pick dumpster. And finally, the last solution on this list is how to beat the purge once and for all. And the answer is doing your taxes. During the purge, all crime, including murder, is legal. But murder is probably the least creative way to spend your 12 hours. First of all, you could actually do your taxes during the purge. You can file taxes online, which means you can file them at any hour of the day, and you may do so between January 1st and April 15th. The purge takes place on the evening of March 21st, so it falls within this time period. Secondly, your federal income tax return has a section known as Schedule A, or itemized deductions. These reduce your federal income tax if you have medical expenses, donations to charity, business expenses, whether you have student loans, and many other factors. There are also exemptions for how many children or dependents you have. So because it's the purge, you can just lie. You can lie on everything. All crime is now legal, including lying on your tax return. Whatever you put on this form is legal. This means that you can maximize all those deductions and exemptions until your federal income tax is zero. If you worked in the past year, the chunk of your paycheck that was set aside for income tax will be sent back to you. If you do this every single year, you will never have to pay taxes again. But here's the best part. Remember how the whole purpose of the purge was to save money by killing off all the poor people? If everyone files fraudulent tax returns during the purge, then no federal income tax will be collected, and the federal government won't have any money at all. The government would be forced to end the purge. Its entire purpose is to save the government money, and if it starts to lose the government money, then the purge will be scrapped. That's how you beat the purge. You don't murder, you don't assassinate or steal. All you have to do is file your tax return. But if I have missed something, or if I made a mistake, or if you think you have an even better way to beat the purge, let us all know about it in the comments. Don't keep that knowledge to yourself, you selfish bastard. If the purge ever happens, your comment could save a life, okay? YouTube comments save lives.
A big
Twist villains are dumb. I'm sure at one point it was enough. A couple of months ago, I was on a Tinder date. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh god, James uses Tinder? And to that, I say, shut up. Tinder is a valid social interaction site, and I have had plenty of valid social interactions on it. Okay? I just want to find someone I can talk to about musicals with for 5 hours. That's not really a difficult request. So me and this girl, who shall remain nameless because I actually don't remember her name and I don't feel like looking it up, talked about musicals for 5 hours. It was nice. We texted back and forth for a little bit after that, but eventually she stopped texting me back and I was like, oh well, guess she's not interested. Back to writing my Shrek 2 review. God, feels like a million years ago I wrote about Shrek 2. Did I mention how stunning the cinematography is? This shit puts live action movies to shame. Oh wait, we were talking about Tinder Girl. Okay, so the point of my story is, she did leave one important impact on me even after all this time. She got me to watch her favorite musical, The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Not the Disney movie, I've seen that. The musical based on the Disney movie. The one that never really made it to Broadway or community theater circulation in my area, and thus I never saw it. So I watched the bootleg and it's really good. Quasimodo has a deformed sounding voice that comes across as haunting, kind of like evil Lupita in Us but less dumb. Phoebus is a dude bro?
Back from the front and admiring both the backs and the fronts.
Odd choice, but he has more character here than he did in the movie, and you still buy his transition into a hero who opposes Frollo's actions. Esmeralda is mostly the same, but given more songs to develop her character and her plight, the gargoyles are way cut down, and A Guy Like You is cut entirely, which is music to my ears. Plus, their one good line from the movie is capitalized on during a pivotal song.
We're only made of stone. We just thought that you were made of something stronger.
Oh man, that's deep.
Overall, it's a great adaptation with more thought and care put into it than most other Disney stage adaptations. Oh wait, did I miss a character? Oh yeah, the greatest Disney villain to ever exist. Judge Claude Frollo, the dude who's so evil he captures a family, murders a woman in cold blood on the steps of a church, and attempts to drown her. Baby in a well. And this is just the first 5 minutes of the movie. How did an even darker, more adult take on the Disney version of this story handle the most evil monster to ever come out of this studio? Well, he seems like a nice guy at first.
Did not see that coming.
Yeah, Claude Frollo, religious fanatic and abusive father who sniffs a woman's hair and tries to force sex out of her by threatening her with death. He seems okay at first. And that is the scariest aspect of this character. Let me break down Froyo in the musical for you. In general, the musical seems to follow the original novel a lot closer than the movie did. By how much exactly? That I don't know, since I never read the book. Because much like my longtime $10 Patreon supporter, I am an uncultured swine. Seriously though, support me on Patreon. I need to feed my 5 kids. Frollo immediately makes a positive impression in the musical by T-posing. So 2.5 minutes in, you see that T-pose and you're like, okay, maybe this guy is alright. He's wearing white, he's the archdeacon in this version and not some corrupt judge. I mean, the archdeacon was so nice in the movie, so Frou Frou is gonna follow suit in this version, right? Religious people are always really nice and holy and spiritual, right? None of them are sadistic monsters, right?
Is this correct?
I mean, it should be.
Getting back to the opening though, the musical deviates from the film by telling Frollo's backstory rather than just starting out with him being a bloodthirsty monster. In the musical, Frollo has an unruly brother, Jehan, who's much more wild and free compared to the stoic, devout, good Christian boy Frollo. Jehan brings a gypsy lady home one day for Claude, and he's like,
"No, thank you, please."
So Claude rats his bro out, who is then expelled for being a bad boy. Several years pass, and Claude gets a letter from Bowser. I mean, his brother. Anyway, his brother is now dying, and his girlfriend died, but they have a baby. I think you know where this is going. So yeah, in this version, Quasimodo isn't just an adoptive son, he's actually Frollo's biological nephew. Yes, we've done that before, but this presents a new sense of ambiguity to their relationship in this version. How much does Frollo truly care for Quasimodo? In the original, not at all. I think that became obvious when he tried to drown the baby in a well, but he doesn't do that in this version, obviously. Quasimodo has explicit meaning to him as the last remnant of his brother, as well as his brother's last request. He doesn't care for Quasimodo out of obligation, since he's gonna go to hell if he doesn't. He cares for the child because he wants to honor his fallen brother. And yet, there's still the sense that Frollo doesn't consider the child fully human.
This child is my cross to bear. I may not have saved my brother, but I will save this thing.
Rude. So that's the gist of the bells in Notre Dame in this version. Obviously, the lyrics and the tempo and everything is different, and from a musical and storytelling standpoint, yeah, I prefer the original. It's more intense, more dramatic, more in line with an almost biblical epic about a mad zealot and his quest to purge the world of what he perceives as a sinful group. But in terms of starting Frollo's story here, it really does him a disservice as a character. For years, we've always said that he's an amazing Disney villain because he has way more depth behind his motivation than the typical Disney bad guy. But does he though? I mean, yeah, he does compared to other Disney villains, but does that make him a complex, layered antagonist with motivations behind his actions? Why does he hate gypsies in the movie? I don't know, he's an asshole. There, now watch him crush this lady's neck with a spiky boot. It just makes sense, don't question it. The musical, however, clearly defines what makes this guy hate gypsies. He blames them for the supposed downward spiral of his brother. Also, he doesn't start out murdering gypsies with no remorse. All he does is talk about avoiding their temptation and describing them as an infestation. This is definitely harmful rhetoric, but it's not literal murder, so that's better? In hindsight, I feel like they played their hand too early with movie Frollo. He goes from 0 to 100 in the first 5 minutes, so from there, he can't really progress that much in terms of how evil he can get. Scar didn't try to murder baby Simba in the first 5 minutes of The Lion King, which makes his murder of Mufasa later on a little more shocking. And Hades does try to murder Hercules very early on, but he's funny, so it's okay. Hercules is very tonally distant from Hunchback. It's much less serious, so starting a movie with attempted baby murder is fine.
FBI, open up!
Oh god, no, that's not what I meant. No, wait, please, no! But yeah, Hunchback is pretty serious, and it sets Frollo up right away as someone not to be trifled with. But the musical, while a bit clunkier in the way it delivers its narrative, paints a much more compelling portrait of a misguided person too stuck on his own strict beliefs to realize the value of helping the less fortunate. So that's the opening. The movie is more entertaining and better constructed, but the musical is more compelling and thought-provoking. And for the most part, that's a bit of a theme. Continuing on, Frollo generally has the same disposition towards gypsies in the musical as he does in the movie, though he doesn't seem quite as sadistic and he doesn't express his hatred quite as vividly. He doesn't give a professional whipper advice on the best way to torture people, and he doesn't squish a bunch of bugs for the evils. The first major deviation comes when Quasi is being attacked by the crowd at the Feast of Fools. Frollo still does his whole "a lesson needs to be learned here" shtick and doesn't help Quasi right away, leading to Esmeralda appearing and giving him water. In the movie, Frollo tells her to get down at once.
Get down!
Leading to a confrontation where the crowd is very much on Esmeralda's side. But in the musical, Frollo doesn't call her out, the crowd does since they're mad she ruined their fun.
What are you doing? You're ruining all our
Which actually sounds like how a crowd in real life would react. These people are assholes to the guy they just tortured. They would obviously also be assholes to the oppressed minority woman who stopped their fun. The movie lives in a slapstick fantasy realm, but I digress. Esmeralda vanishes without interacting with Frollo at all. Then the crowd tries to attack Quasi again, only for Frollo to stop them.
We must show kindness to this creature, as our savior did when he healed the lepers.
That's oddly kind of him. It's weird seeing Frollo using religion to justify a positive action considering how much he uses it as a crutch to do bad stuff. But yeah, compared to Mr. Cold and Unfeeling, you get the sense that maybe this Frollo feels bad for the boy. This scene leads into a semi-reprise of Out There, where Frollo seems to express genuine remorse for Quasi. Both Frollos were right in telling Quasi that the world is cruel and wicked and that dumb 15th century townsfolk will revile him as a monster. But musical Frollo is the only one who seemed to tell Quasi this out of genuine concern for his well-being. Though, there is his own reputation to worry about, which makes this lyric particularly brilliant.
How could you do this?
Aww.
To me?
Oh, so yeah, genuine concern for Quasimodo or selfish concern for his reputation? It's really up to interpretation. This is not.
You idiot!
But that's not even the most compelling interaction Frollo has. Let's talk about him and Esmeralda. Does the movie make you uncomfortable? Well, it should. He's super pervy and gross right away, and that becomes even more abundantly clear during Hellfire. But what does the musical do? Well, Esmeralda comes looking for Quasi, and she and Frollo have an argument. It's pretty civil, all things considered. Eventually, Esmeralda asks him an armor-piercing question.
There must be some charity inside you. If you've helped that boy, then surely you can extend that kindness to others, almost as unfortunate. How you would wish others to treat you. Could you not treat them?
Ooh, that's the golden rule. I learned that from VeggieTales, boyos and girlos. So yeah, this hits Frollo a little hard. He still won't renounce his hatred of gypsies, but he tells Esmeralda to stay for midday mass and maybe find Jesus, I don't know.
My child, though your people are lost, there may be something in you that can be saved. Stay. Perhaps you'll see what true beauty is. And we can continue this conversation afterwards.
So, this is really interesting. If you're unfamiliar with how the story goes, whether it be the Disney narrative or the original novel, here we're 40 minutes in, and I don't know if I could effectively call Frollo the villain here. He seems misguided and blinded by his hatred for gypsies, a hatred that was founded by a tangible event in his past, even though his reaction to it was misguided. And not only is he generally kind to Quasimodo and Esmeralda, but you get the sense here that maybe he isn't beyond saving. Maybe the narrative will be about reforming him and he can let go of his bigotry and hatred with Esmeralda's help. Where was the other Frollo at this point in the story? Oh yeah, sniffing hair. Yeah, no, this guy is going to hell.
And if you do drugs, you go to hell before you die.
But anything could happen with the complex character we see in the musical. Let's see what he does next. I really hope it's not something horrible. So after Esmeralda meets Quasimodo, he doesn't help her escape since, well, she's not a prisoner in this version. Frollo comes upstairs and the two of them talk some more. And he offers to instruct her in how to be righteous. And he asks her to live in the bell tower.
You could come here every day. Or better yet, perhaps, you could stay here.
Stay?
In the cathedral. With me.
I think that would be a good idea.
No?
Yeah, never mind, this is uncomfortable. And yeah, this is an abridged version of how it happens in the real world. People with authority try to build a sense of trust with someone they desire, and it turns out to have been manipulation the whole time. It's genuinely beyond disturbing, and while the movie does deserve credit for not being afraid to depict a creepy, lustful man as its villain, it doesn't really come as a shock. He's a monster from the start. Here, Frollo breaks Esmeralda's trust and the audience's trust, neither of which he had in the original. And this is where the limitations of a pure evil villain really start to show themselves. Movie Frollo is a rotten evil perv to the bone, which leaves very little in terms of compelling characterization. Musical Frollo is trying to lie to himself and everyone around him about his true intentions with Esmeralda. One of my favorite lines from the movie is when Frollo, referring to Esmeralda, says,
"She'll be out of our lives soon enough.
This use of our harkens back to the main contrast between Quasi and Frollo's reactions to Esmeralda. Heaven's Light versus Hellfire. She affected them both in different ways. The same mindset is present in this scene from the musical.
She was sent here. She was put in our paths for a reason. To tempt us. And we resisted.
Yeah, you resisted her. Whatever you say, dickweed. But yeah, the extent to which Frollo is trying to deceive himself that Esmeralda is just some sort of pious test really shows just how dehumanizing he is towards her and her people. It also conveys a sense of twisted kinship between him and Quasimodo, his polar opposite in the story. This scene is where he's at his scariest so far, because we've never seen him be this scary before, but we've seen the progression he took to get to this point. Moving on, Frollo merely has Esmeralda thrown out of Notre Dame in this version, not imprisoned there. He tries to move on, but he ends up searching the streets for her night after night, until he finds her at a conga rave, which is a little weird, but it's okay because this song freaking slaps. And he witnesses her and Phoebus making out, which drives him a little crazy. And this leads to Hellfire. Obviously, this song is the exact same in the musical, because you can't fix what's already perfect. I wish the staging and the costuming was better in the version I watched. Like, seriously, where's the red hooded figures of death? But again, that comes down to who's performing the song. What's different about the song, however, is the context. It's an amazing aspect of both narratives, but here's the difference. In the movie, this song is the most dimension Frollo gets. It makes his previous actions all the more sinister and begs the question of whether or not he's going insane due to his lust and obsession. But it's not like this idea was expressed super well or in depth earlier on in the movie. It just kinda happens here, and boom, instant compelling villain. In the musical, however, it's a perfect natural progression of everything we've been seeing on stage for the past hour. It's clear from his actions and his dialogue and his backstory that he has the capability of being a genuine human being, but the twisted way his urges have manifested have slowly turned him into an uncaring, uncomfortable, vile creature. You get the sense that he didn't have to become the emotionally abusive monster he ended up being, and that his choices in life warped him into this thing. And I'm sorry to say, but this is quite simply too complex of an idea for Walt Disney Animation to tackle. Not that a character that progresses into a villain is too complex for kids to understand, but Disney would never try to tackle that sort of thing. Villains either have to be evil from start to finish, an asshole at the start who becomes full-on evil by the end, or a twist villain who is evil the whole time but only pretended to be good.
That was his mistake.
Musical Frollo is none of these. The closest would be Category 2, but I wouldn't call him an asshole in the same vein as Gaston or Clayton. He has unexpectedly kind attributes to him that shine through in spite of his personal biases, but these get snuffed out as the story progresses, by his madness, by his lust, by his obsession with being pious and wiping out anyone who doesn't fit that description. Movie Frollo is a lot less complex than we give him credit for. It's great to watch an entertaining, unabashedly evil villain, but this story in particular begs for its characters to be complex, and Musical Frollo is just that. Also, he T-poses at the end of Hellfire. Boom! That's 2 T-poses! How many T-poses does Movie Frollo have? 0? I thought so. Things progress pretty much as expected from here on out. There are a few differences, like instead of hitting Phoebus with an arrow, Frollo stabs him in the back and then blames Esmeralda for it. What a guy! But the next major deviation comes after Esmeralda is captured. There's an added scene where Frollo comes in and begs her to build a sanctuary with him, claiming that he can still save her soul if she gives herself over. He expressed this sentiment right before lighting her on fire in the movie. But again, here it's a natural progression of the previous scenes between them. This lunatic has convinced himself that his vile treatment of her is justified and morally right. Everything culminates in this interaction, which is one of the best scenes in the entire show. Like, dude, just watch this musical. I don't want to give anything away. It's just a stunning piece of theater, and this scene gave me chills like 3 or 4 times. It perfectly conveys the idea that Frollo genuinely traumatized her and destroyed her life. There's a simple question Esmeralda asks herself in this scene that utterly devastated me with how accurately it illustrated the horror of her situation. I think we can stop there. You can see how it ends for yourself. It's on YouTube. The Hunchback of Notre Dame musical is the masterful adaptation that the movie was desperately trying to be, but wasn't allowed to. The musical is free of the awful tone issues that plagued the original. The added songs are actually fantastic and fit so well that it's hard to tell the difference between what came from the original and what was added. The characters are more compelling, and you buy their plight and their interactions way more. But Frollo stands in a class all his own. I thought the movie Frollo was the greatest Disney villain of all time, and while he's still great, he's also a huge missed potential. Disney could have crafted the most thought-provoking, complex, and disturbingly dark antagonist in any of their movies. And they kinda did, I'll admit, but he could have been so much more. And that's what this musical gets so right. By making him a real human being, they made him scarier. I know it doesn't seem like an amazing feat to make an animated kids movie darker when you adapt it into a live-action musical, but the thing is, that's not what Disney does. Forget the live-action movies, those are obvious terrible cash grabs. Look at the Disney musicals. None of them are terrible, but they are cash grabs. Bringing Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King to the big screen didn't improve these stories. It's the same story, but with some more pointless songs thrown in. That doesn't apply to every song. I mean, She's in Love is a genuine jam, and The Beast has a couple of solid ballads here and there. But these musicals don't exist because the movies demanded to be on stage and be more mature. They exist because the movies were popular. Put them on Broadway, add a few songs, bada boom, money. The Hunchback of Notre Dame movie was made because the creators had a story they wanted to tell, and the musical was made because the creators had a story they wanted to improve, and that's what they did. This is such an excellent piece of theater, so I'm so glad that it never made it to Broadway and was shunned by Disney in favor of Frozen. That's a movie that needed a musical. Frozen! Yeah, remember when I said the Disney musical adaptations weren't terrible? Well, I forgot about this one, with its pitiful 3 Tony nominations.
I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by
In the world we ride, bikini bottom our own hometown.
The SpongeBob musical and Mean Girls got 12 nominations apiece that same year, FYI. Hunchback probably would have swept the Tonys. But no, I'm so happy we got Frozen on Broadway instead. Isn't that great?
Oh, goody.
But at least this musical, despite not being on Broadway, is really starting to gain traction among theater fans. I've talked to a lot of people who say this is one of their favorite musicals, a sentiment I've never heard expressed about Frozen, so there's that. And I think a lot of this musical success not only comes from the expansion of the elements that made the movie a cult classic, but the revision of certain aspects that were done to make this a more compelling work of art. It's not perfect. I'm not a big fan of the chorus narrating everything, and also... Actually, yeah, that's my only big issue. But I think at the center of these compelling changes is Claude Frollo. Because in stark contrast to what the movie has been telling me my entire life, despite all of his awful tendencies, Claude Frollo is truly human. And that makes him an even greater monster than before. So yeah, turns out the movie Frollo isn't quite as compelling as we all thought. Maybe we can't call him the greatest Disney villain of all time because of this flaw. I guess we'll have to give that distinction to a villain who has no flaws. Tamatoa, baby!
That was his mistake.
Do you ever just look at your recent videos and say, I may have gone too far in a few places? Because, yeah, sometimes it seems like all I ever do is complain. Mostly about Disney, huh? Go figure. But let's be positive for a change. In fact, let's talk about why Shrek 2 is actually one of the greatest sequels of all time. No, I'm not memeing you. I'm dead serious this time. Most people love this movie. Some even love it more than the first. But I don't think anyone ever takes a look at it and says, oh yeah, now that's one of the greatest sequels in cinematic history. Why am I Luigi? But here's the thing. It totally is one of the greatest sequels in cinematic history. Now, I know what you're thinking.
Whoa, back it up.
There's no such thing as a perfect movie. And to that I say,
You are correct, sir.
there's no such thing as a perfect movie, but there is such a thing as a perfect sequel. Alright, you guys really gotta stick with me on this one. This is probably the most TED talking my channel will ever get. So if you understand this next bit, you have a high enough IQ to understand the genius of Shiny. Congrats. So, as I said, there's no such thing as a perfect movie. Even my
Hola amigos, ¿están listos para una lectura perturbadora? Quédense aquí conmigo en Lecturas a Blanco y Negro.
Era un muerto con una mente que aún podía pensar. Conocía todas las respuestas que conocían los muertos, pero en las que éstos no podían pensar. Podía hablar en nombre de los muertos porque era uno de ellos. Muerto desde el principio de los tiempos, que aún conservaba un cerebro para pensar. Nadie podía discutírselo, nadie podía rebatírselo, porque nadie lo sabía mejor que él.
Hoy vamos a hablar de un libro que es Dalton Trumbo, el autor, y el título es Johnny empuñó su fusil. Creo que es un tema que nos implica a todos, tanto a hombres como a mujeres y niños como adultos, y es esta cuestión del servicio militar. Vamos a hablar de una obra de la historia de un soldado herido en guerra y me pareció pertinente hacerlo en este lugar porque si bien el ejército algo que hace es proteger el país a causa de una democracia, pero la pregunta es, ¿qué es democracia? Bienvenidos a esta reseña de Lecturas a Blanco y Negro. Bueno, les voy a contar brevemente de qué trata esta historia. Resulta que un soldado herido en combate llamado Joe va a llegar al hospital. En realidad va a despertar en una camilla y va a descubrir que no tiene brazos, que no tiene piernas, que no tiene ojos, que no tiene oídos, que no tiene boca, que no tiene medio rostro. Él se va a describir literalmente como un pedazo de carne con cerebro. Desde aquí ya se vuelve angustiante la historia. La verdad llegué a este libro precisamente por eso, porque me enteré de que había un personaje perturbador. Y la verdad es que sí, sofoca bastante sentirse en el papel de una persona que no puede ver, no puede escuchar, no puede hablar, no puede moverse, porque sencillamente es un tronco y una cabeza. ¿Y esto a qué se debió? Se debió a que en un combate de la Primera Guerra Mundial, él fue alcanzado por un obús, un misil, un proyectil, una bomba, como se quiera decir, y los médicos lo alcanzaron a salvar. Desafortunadamente, lo tienen como un instrumento médico para estudiarlo y para saber qué pueden hacer en los próximos casos. Resulta que uno se desespera porque este hombre literalmente lo único que puede hacer es pensar. Respira por una sonda, lo alimentan por una sonda. Y entonces uno empieza a cuestionarse cómo va a hacer él para comunicarse. La verdad es que él después de que acepta su situación, de que literalmente es un muerto en vida, empieza a intentar llevar un tiempo. Se imagina una pizarra en su mente, empieza a contar minutos y segundos para así saber los días, los meses, pero la verdad es que la memoria no le alcanza. Se siente angustiado de no poder contar el tiempo, y entonces algo que lo va a llevar a medir el tiempo es cuántas veces lo visita la enfermera. Y entonces él empieza a calcular, tanto número de visitas de la enfermera me bañan, y tanto número de visitas de la enfermera me cambian la cama. Eso quiere decir que un día me cambian la cama y otro día me bañan. Luego él empieza a activar todas sus células, a concentrarse, y descubre que tiene piel en el cuello, y empiezas a decir, si hay sol, sudo porque da calor, y cuando haga frío, entonces quiere decir que está de noche, y así él empieza a descubrir el día de la noche. Hay un capítulo muy conmovedor, o que me conmovió mucho, porque él celebra un año nuevo. Él dice feliz año para todos, y clama allá adentro feliz año, pero la verdad estamos en 4 de julio, según la fecha del libro, y es que él lleva en su memoria ese tiempo, un año. Creo que eso es un mérito de la novela, porque la novela está contada en el tiempo de Joe, no en un tiempo que el narrador quiera, sino el tiempo de él, el que él está contando. Este libro además está cargado de muchas anécdotas y sueños. Es un libro también onírico, porque el personaje, a raíz de que no tiene ojos, no tiene boca, no tiene oídos, no sabe cuándo está dormido y cuándo está despierto. Entonces, a nosotros los lectores nos toca descubrir cuándo está soñando y cuándo está recordando. Pero eso voy a dejar que lo descubran ustedes cuando lean el libro. Otra cosa que me llamó la atención es el final. Él va a recordar que sabe el código Morse. Y cuando él descubre, que era con lo que se escribían los telegramas, el código Morse, él va a empezar a cabecear la almohada. Y la enfermera va a empezar a moverle las cosas, le cambia las sábanas, él sigue moviendo la cabeza, lo bañan, le sigue moviendo la cabeza, abre la ventana, cierra la ventana, no sabe qué hacer, hasta que ella se le ocurre golpearle la frente, y él dice que sí, y entonces ella se va a avisarle a los hombres, y los hombres vuelven, y es cuando por fin logra Joe comunicarse a través de su cabeza con golpeteos con el código Morse. A él le van a decir, what do you want? ¿Qué quiere usted? Y eso de verdad que a uno como lector le causa una emoción grandísima, porque es un hombre que tal vez lleva años postrado en una cama, absolutamente solo, abandonado de Dios, como dice el autor, y logra por fin, después de mucho tiempo, comunicarse con los hombres. Y ahí va a venir todo un discurso donde Joe quiere decir, yo quiero que me exhiban en un circo para que la gente vea lo que han causado ustedes, porque los enanos nacen enanos, las deformidades nacen, son biológicas, pero lo que me pasó a mí es obra de ustedes, por la guerra. Y la respuesta que le van a dar estos hombres en su frente a través del código Morse es, eso no se puede. Y Joe será el secreto de la humanidad, porque la humanidad no podrá saber las consecuencias que trae la guerra.
Por supuesto, un montón de tipos se sintieron avergonzados. Alguien dijo, vayamos y luchemos por la libertad, así que fueron y los mataron sin haber pensado en la libertad de una vez. ¿Y por qué clase de libertad luchaban si vamos a eso? ¿Cuánta libertad y la idea de libertad de quién? Luchaban por la libertad de comer cucuruchos de helado gratis para el resto de sus vidas, o por la libertad de robar a cualquiera que les apeteciese cuando quisieran, o por qué. Le dices a un hombre que no robe y le estás quitando parte de su libertad. ¿Es así? ¿Qué demonios significa libertad en todo caso? ¿Es solo una palabra como casa o mesa o cualquier otra palabra? Solo que es una clase especial de palabra. Un tipo dice casa y puede señalar una casa para probarlo, pero un tipo dice, venga, luchemos por la libertad, y no puede mostrarte la libertad. No puede probar las cosas de las que está hablando, así que ¿cómo demonios puede pedirte que luches por ellas?
Bueno, como les acabo de contar, Joe es un personaje de ficción, obviamente, esto no sucede en la realidad, pero es un personaje muy inteligente, porque considero yo que el autor lo que hizo fue mutilarle todo para crear, y es literalmente la verdad. Me encuentro con un personaje muerto en vida. Durante toda la novela, y creo que eso es algo que lo atrapa a uno de leer este libro, es mutilarse con él. Es caer en la cuenta hasta de qué es ser humano. Ser humano es sencillamente tener un cerebro, porque resulta que Joe puede sentir. Joe puede sentir no solamente con el pedazo de carne que le queda. Joe tiene sentimientos. Y en toda esta serie de anécdotas que tiene Joe antes de ir a la guerra, nos sensibiliza, y creo que el libro carga una magia especial donde nos pone a cuestionar, no solamente agradecer que estamos completos, sino a cuestionar el hecho de por qué ir a la guerra. Creo que el capítulo más valioso del libro es el capítulo 10, donde nos habla, por ejemplo, de cómo los otros seres humanos disfrutan de que nosotros sacrifiquemos nuestra sangre por simples discursos. Podríamos decir, hay que pelear por la patria, hay que pelear por la democracia, hay que pelear por la libertad. Pero, ¿de qué libertad me están hablando? Asegúreme usted que si yo voy a la guerra y doy mi vida, va a haber esa libertad que usted está diciendo. Entonces, la sangre honorable de los héroes. Y resulta que quien va a la guerra es un zapatero que va a matar a otro zapatero. Quien va a la guerra no está haciendo un trato. ¿Cómo así que debo ir a morir para vivir? Eso no tiene sentido. Dice, siempre ves a gente que está deseando sacrificar la vida de otro. Hacen mucho ruido y hablan sin parar. Puedes encontrártelos en iglesias y escuelas y periódicos y legislaturas y congresos. Es un negocio. Suenan de maravilla. La muerte antes que el deshonor. Esta tierra santificada por la sangre. Estos hombres que murieron con tanta gloria. No habrán muerto en vano. Nuestros nobles muertos. Pero resulta que Johnny, sentado, o Joe, sentado, recostado en la camilla, va a decir, ¿por qué debería hacer eso? ¿Por qué tendría que hacerlo? ¿Y qué voy a sacar yo al final de esa guerra? ¿Será que es un trato válido? Y al final dice, lo importante es vuestra vida, muchachos. Eso lo está pensando Johnny ahí recostado. Lo importante es nuestra vida, muchachos. Muertos, no valéis más que para discursos. No dejéis que os engañen nunca más. No hagáis caso cuando os den una palmadita en el hombro y os digan, vamos, tenemos que luchar por la libertad o la palabra. Que sea siempre, hay una palabra.
Podía decirles a todos esos charlatanes, asesinos, hijos de puta, que clamaban por sangre, lo equivocados que estaban. Podía decirles, señores, no hay nada por lo que valga la pena morir, y yo lo sé porque estoy muerto. Ninguna palabra vale tu vida. Preferiría trabajar en una mina de carbón, bajo tierra, y no ver nunca la luz del sol, y comer pan y agua y trabajar 20 horas al día. Preferiría eso antes que estar muerto. Cambiaría la democracia por la vida. Cambiaría la independencia y el honor y la libertad y la decencia por la vida. Yo os daría todas esas cosas a cambio de poder caminar y ver y oír y respirar el aire y probar mi comida.
Bueno amigos, y se me había olvidado comentarles así muy rápidamente que esta novela fue censurada durante la Primera Guerra Mundial, durante la Guerra de Corea y durante la Guerra de Vietnam. Resulta que cuando los soldados empezaron a leer este libro, empezaron a desertar de las tropas porque vieron cómo estos hombres al final dejan abandonado a Johnny, quien les había servido, y es ahí donde se concreta el argumento de si realmente estamos peleando por una democracia o no, si este trato de arriesgar la vida de uno por aquello que llamamos libertad, si es que es la verdadera libertad, vale la pena o no. Este libro fue llevado al cine por su propio autor, pueden encontrar la película en internet, realmente prefiero el libro, en la película suceden algunos cambios, no van a entender la aparición de algunos personajes y definitivamente es mucho mejor el lenguaje escrito. Espero les haya gustado esta reseña, amigos, estos espacios medios de Bogotá. Bogotá, una ciudad siempre encantadora, mi tierra natal, y aquí seguiremos reseñando libros en lecturas a blanco y negro.
The cerebrum has suffered massive and irreparable damage. You never know what has happened to him.
Esta es una de las canciones más famosas de Metallica y trata sobre el fatal destino de un soldado en la Primera Guerra Mundial. Está inspirada en la película Johnny cogió su fusil. Y si quieres enterarte bien qué nos está contando Metallica en esta canción, te invito a que te quedes en el vídeo porque vamos a desarrollarlo. Hubo un tiempo en el que Metallica decían que no iban a grabar videoclips, porque eso era muy comercial, Y míralos ahora, que sacan un videoclip por canción. El caso es que cuando se iniciaron en esto de los videoclips, porque básicamente lo que habían dicho era una tontería, pues decidieron coger la canción One. Este era su primer videoclip. Y tampoco se lo curraron mucho porque básicamente es ellos tocando y extractos de la película en la que se basa la canción. Esta película, Johnny cogió su fusil o Johnny tomó su fusil en Latinoamérica, porque ya sabéis que coger significa otra cosa ahí, pues no sea que pensemos que Johnny es un poco extraño. Bueno, pues Johnny resulta que es un soldado que va a la guerra en la Primera Guerra Mundial. Y de esto va la película, pero es que lo que le pasa es una desgracia como pocas, Esta película a su vez está basada en un libro que es del mismo nombre. Y tanto la película como el guión como el libro pertenecen a la misma persona, que es Dalton Trumbo. Así que ya tenemos claro que Dalton Trumbo hizo de todo, bueno, escribió el libro, el guión y luego salió la película en 1971, ¿vale? Y aunque es de género bélico, en realidad el mensaje tanto del libro como de la película como de la canción es pacifista porque nos está contando un drama de un soldado norteamericano en la Primera Guerra Mundial. Vamos a verlo bien. Nos situamos entre 1914 y 1918, es decir, la Primera Guerra Mundial o lo que entonces se conocía como la Gran Guerra, porque no sabían que iba a haber una segunda temporada aún más hardcore. En esta primera temporada pues es la guerra más sangrienta y más bestia hasta el momento y transcurre casi en su totalidad en Europa. Mueren entre 10 millones de personas y 30. Así que sí, como hay tantos soldados desaparecidos, pues no se sabe. Entonces tú coges entre 10 millones y 30, pues 20 millones, pues 20 murieron. Y luego además hubo otros 20 millones de heridos, que probablemente serían muchos más también, claro. Entonces el caso es que no era una guerra rápida, como podríamos entender que fue la Segunda Guerra Mundial, en plan llegamos, conquistamos, no. Ahí una posición a lo mejor aguantaba 3 años en el frente, 3 años en el frente llenos de barro, de tiroteo, de ver morir a tus amigos en la tierra de nadie, en el barro y verles ahí que se están pudriendo y que nadie puede ir a por ellos porque es cuando ya se incorpora la ametralladora, los aviones, los cepelines, más tarde el tanque, cuando se usan gases, además ahí empieza a haber submarinos, o sea que es como la guerra más violenta hasta el momento, pero la tecnología no era lo suficientemente fuerte como para avanzar tanto, entonces pues ahí metidos en una trinchera durante años. En medio de todo eso pues está Johnny, el protagonista de nuestra historia, pero primero vamos a repasar por qué hace 100 años hubo una gran guerra, por qué hubo esta Primera Guerra Mundial. Contexto base es muy fácil de poner porque es lo de siempre, hay una escalada de intereses de países que se creen lo más y entonces dicen, pues igual podemos coger este territorio o no, tal, bueno, y entonces empieza a haber alianzas debido a esta escalada de poder entre lo que era entonces los imperios, ¿no? Pues estaba el imperio ruso, estaba el imperio británico, en fin, el imperio austrohúngaro y demás, entonces empieza a haber una escalada de poder y entonces se tienen que forjar alianzas. Las alianzas implican que si atacan al que has declarado que es tu aliado, pues tú tienes que atacar a esa persona que le está atacando, ¿no? Pues eso es lo que es ser aliado, ¿no? Entonces, con que uno entra en guerra con otro, pues puede desencadenar que todo el mundo entre en guerra con todo el mundo, que es básicamente lo que pasó. ¿Pero cómo? Por un lado tenemos a Francia, el Imperio Británico, y Rusia por un lado, ¿vale? Que es lo que se conocía como la Triple Entente. Y luego en el otro equipo, bueno, pues tenemos al Imperio Alemán, el Imperio Austrohúngaro y el Imperio Otomano. Luego cada uno fue haciendo sus fichajes, y fueron incorporando más gente. Los alemanes para llegar a Francia decían, pues vamos por Bélgica. Bélgica obviamente decía, bueno, pues entonces me alío con los franceses porque me estás invadiendo. Y así por eso Estados Unidos entró más tarde. Pero bueno, esto ahora lo vemos. El caso es que en 1914 en Sarajevo, que actualmente es Bosnia y Herzegovina, matan al archiduque Francisco Fernando, que es el heredero del trono austrohúngaro. Lo mata un grupo terrorista llamado La Mano Negra, y de un plan un poco improvisado, que eran nacionalistas serbios, ¿vale? Y lo mata un chico llamado Gavrilo Princip, que luego, gracias a él, fichajes, y fueron incorporando más gente. A ver una escalada de poder. Es lo de siempre, hay una escalada de intereses de países que se creen lo más y entonces dicen, pues igual podemos coger este territorio o no, tal, bueno, y entonces empieza a haber alianzas debido a esta escalada de poder entre lo que era entonces los imperios, ¿no? Pues estaba el imperio ruso, estaba el imperio británico, en fin, el imperio austrohúngaro y demás, entonces empieza a haber una escalada de poder y entonces se tienen que forjar alianzas. Las alianzas implican que si atacan al que has declarado que es tu aliado, pues tú tienes que atacar a esa persona que le está atacando, ¿no? Pues eso es lo que es ser aliado, ¿no? Entonces, con que uno entra en guerra con otro, pues puede desencadenar que todo el mundo entre en guerra con todo el mundo, que es básicamente lo que pasó. ¿Pero cómo? Por un lado tenemos a Francia, el Imperio Británico, y Rusia por un lado, ¿vale? Que es lo que se conocía como la Triple Entente. Y luego en el otro equipo, bueno, pues tenemos al Imperio Alemán, el Imperio Austrohúngaro y el Imperio Otomano. Luego cada uno fue haciendo sus fichajes, y fueron incorporando más gente. Los alemanes para llegar a Francia decían, pues vamos por Bélgica. Bélgica obviamente decía, bueno, pues entonces me alío con los franceses porque me estás invadiendo. Y así por eso Estados Unidos entró más tarde. Pero bueno, esto ahora lo vemos. El caso es que en 1914 en Sarajevo, que actualmente es Bosnia y Herzegovina, matan al archiduque Francisco Fernando, que es el heredero del trono austrohúngaro. Lo mata un grupo terrorista llamado La Mano Negra, y de un plan un poco improvisado, que eran nacionalistas serbios, ¿vale? Y lo mata un chico llamado Gavrilo Princip, que luego, gracias a este, pues se desencadena la Primera Guerra Mundial y eso tiene como consecuencia la Segunda. Así que Gavrilo es un tío que le ha liado bastante en la historia de la humanidad. Bueno. El caso es que después de este atentado, porque este hombre que han matado, el archiduque, resulta que es el heredero del trono austrohúngaro, y entonces dicen, bueno, pues nosotros, Austro-Hungría, tenemos que abrir una investigación y vamos a investigar en Serbia qué ha pasado ahí. Y entonces los serbios dicen, pues va a ser que no. Claro, los otros diciendo, pero ¿cómo que no me dejas investigar que habéis matado a mi heredero? Que no lo hacéis. Serbia entonces era aliado de los rusos. Bueno, pues va a Austro-Hungría y dice, bueno, pues si no me dejáis investigar por qué habéis matado a mi heredero, os invado. Y entonces Rusia dice, ¿cómo que estás invadiendo Serbia? Os invado yo ahora a vosotros. Y entonces estos serán aliados de los alemanes y los alemanes dicen, bueno, pues habrá que invadir Rusia. Pero es que Rusia también era aliada de Francia. Entonces los alemanes dicen, bueno, pues ya que estamos, vamos a dar un poco de estopa a los franceses. En fin, se desencadena todo y empieza a haber ahí una guerra de trincheras, lo que digo, durante años, en la que no se avanza absolutamente nada. A esto, por cierto, hay que sumarle también que los territorios colonizados están en guerra. Es decir, como África era prácticamente entera de Europa hasta entonces, que se la habían repartido, pues también empiezan a traer tropas a Europa o a matarse entre ellos. O sea que gran guerra, Primera Guerra Mundial. De hecho, es por eso que este riff de Metallica es tan típico, este momento de la canción, porque suena como ametralladoras y de hecho lo ambientan como ametralladoras. brutal tal, nada avanza y entonces en 1917 todo cambia. En primer lugar porque un año antes ya habían incorporado el tanque, ese pedazo de invento de ir una caja metálica rodando, pegando tiros, y eso ya pues más o menos cambia un poco los frentes. Pero resulta que algo pasa en Rusia en 1917, que es que estalla la revolución. Hay muchos rusos que están diciendo, mira, aquí los nobles viven de puta madre, nosotros nos estamos comiendo los mocos, estamos yendo a otro sitio a pelear por los serbios que a nosotros nos dan lo mismo. Nos revolucionamos, matamos al zar, que es como el emperador o rey de Rusia, y nos piramos de la guerra. Que os den por culo a todos. Además, entonces tenéis que tener en cuenta que estaba la gripe española, es decir, que es la mayor epidemia de gripe que ha habido en el mundo, que se estaba cargando a muchísima gente. Si encima estabas ahí metido en una trinchera, todo asqueado, comiendo mal, con todas las enfermedades que pueden surgir, pues además una oleada de gripe. O sea que muriendo muchísima gente. Claro, los rusos dicen que pasan, que se piran. Normal. Por cierto, se llama gripe española no porque fuese española, porque España pasó de meterse en la guerra, dijo esto, si os queréis matar, ya nos matamos nosotros entre nosotros, no nos necesitamos a vosotros, ¿no? Y lo que pasa es que los periódicos, pues claro, no tenían que estar hablando todo el día de la guerra, entonces dijeron, oye, que es que aquí hay mucha gripe. Entonces, como salían los periódicos españoles, pues lo llamaron gripe española, pero no es que le inventásemos los españoles. Bueno, pues nos hemos quedado en que Rusia ha dicho que se pira, ¿vale? Bueno, pues entonces Alemania coge todas sus tropas del frente oriental y los mueve al frente occidental, a Francia. Pero son tropas que ya están muy menguadas y bastante hecho polvo, por estar ahí luchando contra Rusia. Pero bueno, dicen, a lo mejor igual así rompemos ya por fin el frente. Pero entonces entra Estados Unidos. Estados Unidos entra como aliado de Inglaterra y de Francia y ya equilibra ahí un poco la balanza y empiezan a avanzar hacia Alemania. Para que os hagáis una idea de lo fundamental que fue la ayuda de Estados Unidos, los alemanes se quedaron a 120 kilómetros de París. O sea, a una horita en coche de ahora, claro, porque entonces dirá, voy a 50, qué velocidad. Sí, se quedaron súper cerca. Lo que pasa es que los estadounidenses ayudaron y bueno, los alemanes tuvieron que replegarse diciendo, bueno, otra vez será, no nos olvidaremos. Y el caso es que nada, ya pues por fin Estados Unidos empieza a ganar terreno, pero esto tiene mucho sacrificio, obviamente, porque como os digo, que es una guerra tan estática, tan quieto, que es básicamente a base de morir mucha gente cuando se logra avanzar un poquito. Ellos perdieron hasta 250.000 soldados en la Primera Guerra Mundial, que comparado con los millones de los demás, pues eran muy pocos, claro, pero el hecho es que ellos perdieron muchas tropas en un continente que, bueno, en un principio ni les iba ni les venía. Y el caso es que entre estos está Johnny. Johnny es un personaje ficticio, pero representa a un soldado medio americano que se ha apuntado porque cree en el ideal de la guerra. Se llama Johnny porque una canción muy famosa bélica de entonces, para animar a los jóvenes que vayan ahí a matar, Over There se llamaba esa canción, pues venía a decir el primer verso, Johnny, coge tu fusil. Bueno, pues Johnny cogió su fusil, fue a la guerra y le cayó una bomba encima. De tal manera que Johnny no muere, tranquilos, Johnny sobrevive, pero se queda sin brazos, sin piernas, sin el sentido de la vista, se queda ciego, se queda sordo también, pierde la capacidad de hablar, pierde la lengua también, se queda mudo y encima también no puede oler nada. Se queda desconectado totalmente, atrapado en sí mismo. No obstante, sobrevive. Básicamente se convierte en un torso viviente que no puede hacer nada ni comunicarse. Lo único que puede hacer es recordar. Simplemente puede estar ahí rememorando sus vivencias más importantes. Tras varios años incapacitados, resulta que entre los médicos y él descubren una manera de comunicarse. Ya os digo que es una manera que ninguno de nosotros podría, salvo que haya sido Boy Scout o militar, porque básicamente se comunica por código Morse. Ya sabéis, este punto raya, que viene a ser el alfabeto. Entonces él movía la cabeza para adelante o para atrás, entonces presionando mucho rato es raya y presionando un ratito muy corto es punto. Entonces a partir de eso puede comunicarse con los médicos y lo primero que viene a decirles es, por favor, matadme. Es decir, esta canción también es una especie de alegoría a la eutanasia, porque ¿quiénes somos nosotros para juzgar si alguien tiene que vivir o no? Y más en esa situación, ¿no? Pero el caso es que dicen los médicos, bueno, pero igual es que no, nosotros no podemos matarte porque no es legal y estas cosas, ¿no? Y dice, vale, pues muy bien, podemos hacer una cosa, llevadme en una vitrina de paseo por todo Estados Unidos, exponedme como si fuese una especie de circo para que la gente vea el horror de la guerra. Pero los médicos se niegan, entonces Johnny sabe que al final él se va a quedar ahí el resto de su vida haciendo nada. Entonces Johnny sabe que se va a quedar el resto de su vida ahí atrapado. En la película hay una enfermera que intenta desconectarle de todos los tubos y todas las cosas que tiene para que muera, ¿vale? Pero esto no pasa en el libro. El caso es que, en fin, es una situación muy jodida y viene a decir, oye, la guerra es horrible, nada de encumbrarla como somos todos héroes, somos todos la leche, vamos a morir por la patria. Eso es una vieja mentira y puede ser muy desgraciado si sobrevives. En fin, y de esto va la canción One de Metallica. Es un dramón, ¿eh? Espero aún así que os haya gustado y que ahora cuando la estéis escuchando, cuando la veáis en directo, pues enfoquéis esta canción con otra perspectiva, mucho más, digan, pues mira, me está contando una historia muy interesante. Si os ha gustado mucho, o un poco aunque sea, compartidlo con todos aquellos que sepáis que les gusta Metallica, que les guste las historias de la Primera Guerra Mundial, o si conoces, yo que sé, alguien que se haya quedado sin brazos ni pierna y sin yo que sé, sin voz ni nada, pues mientras le queden oídos le pones unos auriculares y le ponen mi vídeo, a ver qué opina. En fin, que muchas gracias por estar ahí, un vídeo más, una canción nueva en la que ponemos en contexto. Espero que os haya gustado de verdad, así que un saludo muy grande y nos vemos en el próximo vídeo.
Es posible que te suene esta canción. Es una de las canciones más famosas del grupo Iron Maiden, pero a lo mejor lo que no sabes es de qué va esta canción, cuál es la historia que hay detrás de esta canción. Y va de una de las cargas de caballería más nefastas y más absurdas de toda la historia de la humanidad. Así que si quieres que te lo cuente con detalle, quédate en el vídeo, que lo vamos a explicar. Bueno, vamos a ir de lo general a lo particular, ¿vale? En primer lugar, decir que esta canción es una de las más famosas de Iron Maiden, del mundo del heavy y ya del rock en general. Así que quizás puede resultar muy interesante que te quedes en todo el vídeo y veas lo tontos que podemos llegar a ser los humanos y cómo de eso podemos hacer una canción muy épica. En primer lugar, deciros que esta canción va de una carga de caballería que ocurrió en una batalla en Crimea. Vamos a ir de lo general a lo particular. Por si estás muy perdido, ¿dónde está Crimea? Crimea está en Ucrania, es decir, al este de Europa, pues en Ucrania, al sur hay una península que se llama la península de Crimea, ¿vale? Que está en el Mar Negro. Mar Negro, que por cierto se llama así porque los otomanos, es decir, los turcos, pues bueno, veían que se ponía muy negro, sobre todo en las tormentas, porque ese mar tiene mucha sal, y aunque es blanca la sal, pues oscurece el mar, ¿no? Y aparte que los otomanos, pues lo llaman Mar Negro, y al Mediterráneo lo llaman Mar Blanco, porque tiene que haber, si hay Mar Negro, tiene que haber uno blanco, ¿no? El caso es que hubo una guerra entre 1853 y 1856, y en esa guerra pues había dos equipos, ¿vale? El primero estaba formado por el Reino Unido, el Imperio Británico, por otra parte estaban los franceses y por otra parte estaban los otomanos, es decir, los turcos. Y luego en el bando contrario estaban los rusos y los griegos. Vale, ¿qué pinta toda esta gente ahí? Bueno, en primer lugar decirte que es una cuestión de probabilidad. El Reino Unido ha invadido 9 de cada 10 países que hay en el mundo, así que si compartes planeta con el Reino Unido, lo cual es muy probable, porque si estás viendo este vídeo es porque eres del planeta Tierra, no creo que seas un alienígena, pues entonces tienes un 90% de posibilidades de que tu país haya sido invadido por el Reino Unido. Luego, por otra parte, estaban los franceses, que en el siglo XIX pues estaban muy subiditos. Luego ya en el siglo XX Alemania se encargó de bajar los humos a Francia. Y por otra parte, bueno, pues también estaban los otomanos, que bueno, que básicamente su día a día es invadir a los vecinos, era un día más. Pero había un imperio que lo estaba petando mucho entonces, que era el Imperio Ruso. Entonces entraron en guerra con ellos para que no se viniesen tan arriba. Es decir, es un sitio estratégico, controlabas el Mar Negro desde ahí, pues bueno, pues entramos en guerra, ¿vale? Y por otra parte también estaban los griegos, que los griegos, Grecia nos había terminado de formar entonces como el país que es ahora, porque siempre había estado conquistado e invadido, y entonces siempre ha estado en guerra con los otomanos. Como curiosidad deciros que es que Grecia tiene uno de los ejércitos más tochos del mundo, precisamente porque no se fían de los turcos, porque son vecinos, ¿vale? Entonces se aliaban con los rusos pues para molestar a los otomanos. Ya está. Así que con esto ya entendemos por qué Bruce Dickinson sale con este uniforme y con la bandera, ¿no? La Union Jack, ¿no? Del Reino Unido. Está Crimea. Crimea está en Ucrania, es decir, al este de Europa, pues en Ucrania, al sur hay una península que se llama la península de Crimea, ¿vale? Que está en el Mar Negro. Mar Negro, que por cierto se llama así porque los otomanos, es decir, los turcos, pues bueno, veían que se ponía muy negro, sobre todo en las tormentas, porque ese mar tiene mucha sal, y aunque es blanca la sal, pues oscurece el mar, ¿no? Y aparte que los otomanos, pues lo llaman Mar Negro, Y al Mediterráneo lo llaman Mar Blanco, porque tiene que haber, si hay Mar Negro, tiene que haber uno blanco, ¿no? El caso es que ahí hubo una guerra entre 1853 y 1856. Y en esa guerra pues había dos equipos, ¿vale? El primero estaba formado por el Reino Unido, el Imperio Británico, por otra parte estaban los franceses y por otra parte estaban los otomanos, es decir, los turcos. Y luego en el bando contrario estaban los rusos y los griegos. Vale, ¿qué pinta toda esta gente ahí? Bueno, en primer lugar decirte que es una cuestión de probabilidad. El Reino Unido ha invadido 9 de cada 10 países que hay en el mundo, así que si compartes planeta con el Reino Unido, lo cual es muy probable, porque si estás viendo este vídeo es porque eres del planeta Tierra, no creo que seas un alienígena, pues entonces tienes un 90% de posibilidades de que tu país haya sido invadido por el Reino Unido. Luego, por otra parte, estaban los franceses, que en el siglo XIX pues estaban muy subiditos. Luego ya en el siglo XX Alemania se encargó de bajar los humos a Francia. Y por otra parte, bueno, pues también estaban los otomanos, que bueno, que básicamente su día a día es invadir a los vecinos, era un día más. Pero había un imperio que lo estaba petando mucho entonces, que era el Imperio Ruso. Entonces entraron en guerra con ellos para que no se viniesen tan arriba. Es decir, es un sitio estratégico, controlabas el Mar Negro desde ahí, pues bueno, pues entramos en guerra, ¿vale? Y por otra parte también estaban los griegos, que los griegos, Grecia nos había terminado de formar entonces como el país que es ahora, porque siempre había estado conquistado e invadido, y entonces siempre ha estado en guerra con los otomanos. Como curiosidad deciros que es que Grecia tiene uno de los ejércitos más tochos del mundo, precisamente porque no se fían de los turcos, porque son vecinos, ¿vale? Entonces se aliaban con los rusos pues para molestar a los otomanos. Ya está. Así que con esto ya entendemos por qué Bruce Dickinson sale con este uniforme y con la bandera, ¿no? La Union Jack, ¿no? Del Reino Unido. Porque, bueno, está recreando ese momento histórico. Vamos a la batalla, ¿vale? Ya estamos en Crimea, en la guerra, ¿vale? Pues ahora vamos a la batalla de Balaclava. Bueno, en Crimea hay una región que se llama Balaclava y fíjate tú, qué casualidad, también hay una ciudad que se llama Balaclava, se llama igual. Así que la situación es la siguiente. Sebastopol, que es una ciudad portuaria, y quizás os suene, porque luego en la Segunda Guerra Mundial también se montó ahí un jaleo interesante. Bueno, pues Sebastopol estaba en ese momento en manos de los rusos. Y entonces los ingleses dijeron, esto no puede ser, así que decidieron, vamos a desembarcar en Sebastopol y a su vez vamos a atacar por el otro lado en un movimiento como de pinza para asaltar la ciudad definitivamente, ¿vale? Y porque no había aviación entonces, aún quedaban 50 años para el primer avión, que si no, ahí lo habrían hecho también, un ataque en 3D. Pero el caso es que era un desastre. El ataque por mar duró mucho más de lo que tenían pensado y no lograron bloquear las vías de comercio. Los rusos podían estar trayendo tropas de refresco todo el rato y mientras tanto la caballería, es decir, la infantería y la caballería desembarcaba cerca para poder atacarles y también lo hizo muy mal. Resulta que una de sus principales tropas pues eran precisamente la caballería, ¿no? Y bueno, pues de camino en los propios barcos murieron muchos caballos porque no los cuidaban, se estresaban y morían ahí. Así que tenían un mogollón de gente de caballería sin caballos. Así que nada más llegar tuvieron que comprar caballos a los otomanos, que estarían pensando, madre mía, ¿a quién tenemos en el equipo? O sea, estos tíos son bastante noobs. Ahora pues ya poco a poco fueron avanzando. Pero es que entonces la cosa empeora. Vale, ¿quién dirigía todo esto? Se llamaba Lord Raglan. Y este tío tuvo una idea genial. Dijo, bueno, pues la caballería voy a dividirlo en dos secciones, ¿no? Que es ligera y pesada. Y uno lo va a dirigir Charles Brigham y otro Lord Cardigan. No les juzguéis por sus pintas, porque, bueno, era la moda en el momento, ¿eh? O en los barrios hipster de Londres, pues también van vestidos así, ¿vale? Juzgarles porque los dos eran tontísimos, ¿vale? Porque los dos estaban enemistados. Sí, estaban en el mismo ejército, pero se llevaban a matar. Los dos, su enemistad era conocida, era de dominio público, y decide que los dos los meten en el mismo equipo y dice, ahora vais a tener que trabajar juntos. Bien, ya os anticipo que si estos dos tíos se echan una partida en cooperativo contigo, te abandonarán y te dejarán muerto, ¿vale? Porque estos tíos, mientras avanzaban, se dedicaron a putearse el uno al otro. Es decir, cuando uno avanzaba para marcarse un tanto, no contaba con la ayuda del otro, pero si les estaban atacando, pues no le ayudaban tampoco, aunque lo necesitasen. Iban perdiendo soldados porque no se querían ayudar entre ellos y a la vez querían marcarse un tanto y quedar por encima del otro. De camino a Sebastopol, además, como no tenían buenas líneas de suministros, más caballos iban muriendo y entre todas esas refriegas, pues como digo, iban perdiendo soldados porque no se estaban ayudando. Y mientras tanto los rusos pues trayendo más gente. Esto ya es el desastre anunciado, ¿no? Pero es que de verdad puede empeorar. Y como puede empeorar, ya intuiréis que la canción, pues bueno, va a contar algo que en realidad es un poco triste. Bueno, ya estamos diciendo que